Now I'm live. All right. And where is it at in the members Facebook group? There it is. All right. Why is it not going live? There we go. I think that did it.
You look good from here.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that. Hey, David. How's it going? Okay. We'll move this over here till we officially start. And 2 minutes. All right, so we have 2 minutes. Hey, Patty. Great to have you on here. So we've got. All right, so as everyone comes on, you can just say, you can just tell us where you're at and how things are going for you, that sort of thing. So, and then we'll officially start here in just a moment. A little over a minute. It's beautiful out here right now. Outside it is sunny and very nice this morning. Yeah, rain would be good right now. But our flowers are coming out. We've got sunflowers that are getting taller, and we've got some small dahlias that are about to bloom, and gladiolas that are moving their way up. So we're getting more and more things are growing. I'm excited to get some painting done of those things. All the flowers that are coming around. So, well, I won't actually do any of that until it's time. I guess it is 10 o'clock now, so we can get started. Hi, Joy and Gail, Sandy. Sandy, we're very happy to hear things went well with Danny. And oh, there it goes. It wasn't showing the whole comment. All right, well, hopefully you won't feel like it's the hot seat too much here today. So I guess it is time for us to start. It's now 10 o'clock, and people will be coming in more and more as we go along. All right, so I'm going to move Facebook over again and get ready to start the webinar. So I won't be able to see your, it says volume increase. Is it the sound not coming through enough? Let me turn this direction to get the mic a little bit closer. Will that help? Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Let's see. Christy, can you hear all right? Is the volume working about normal?
It's still in the Facebook, you moving the mic, hold on. Not a lot, but I don't know if that's because my computer volume sounds good.
Uh-huh. So you can hear it all right then? Okay. All right, well, if Christy will let me know if we seem to have any technical problems. She's got it going on the other end. Although I don't think she's really listening to everything, just watching the comments. Okay, so the announcements we're going to save for the end this time instead of here at the beginning, because we have a lot of members that come in as the webinar progresses. So the things that, so what I'll do is just tell those who are new to the format what this is and how it works. So, because we had several new ones here in the critiques as well. We have two different systems really that we use now, the Zoom room and this this one through Facebook. It's actually called Be Live, and we use that with the Facebook Live because if we try to use something like the Zoom room, when new people come in, as they come in, their mics are on, and with their critiques, these, sorry, I got something flew in my eye. With the critique webinars, they take 3 to 4 hours usually, and that's a long time. So if we had to deal with trying to, because a lot of times when people are coming in with Zoom, they don't realize that their mic is on, and all the background noise like dogs barking or people moving around can suddenly take and interrupt all the sound, and then those who are listening won't be able to hear the critiques. So we would love to do something like a Zoom room for these critiques, but it doesn't seem logistically that it would work out very well. So we use the Facebook Live scenario instead, because then you can, first of all, the replay on the Facebook Live is available immediately, and we love that. With something like a Zoom room recording, or with some of our other webinar software that we've used in the past, we have to wait and download the replay after it has compressed and all that and processed, and then we can get it onto our website. It takes a lot longer, usually days. Whereas now the replay is available almost instantly on Facebook. So we love that. Then you can go back and watch it, you know, especially with your own painting, you can go back in and see it immediately, or for those who come in late or early, or have to leave early and don't get to see their critique or whatever, or they don't get to see the whole thing, then they can go and watch it as soon as they're able. So that's the reason we do the two different formats. The Zoom room is more for like the painting training that I do, the online workshop. We use Zoom room for that because it's only an hour long to an hour and a half, depending on how many questions people have that day. And it's a lot less move on through you know, all the different critiques that we have. So because of the shorter duration, and because it's just nice to be able to see one another and talk to each other with actual voice conversation, we love everything we can do with Zoom room that way. And then of course the Wednesday lunch breaks we do with Zoom room, because that's what it's all about, is so we can get to know one another. And just looking over at chat, we don't get emotion, we don't see facial expressions. There's so much that gets lost in translation. Kind of like the difference between painting out on location and trying to paint from a photograph. The two, there's just no comparison between the two. So with the critiques, keep in mind, especially for those that this is the first time you're having your painting critiqued, there is not any single artist on the earth today, or probably that's ever been on the earth, as far as somebody actually oil painting, that knows everything. Nobody out there. Nobody has conquered every problem that is possible to conquer. So when I'm critiquing these are suggestions. Yes, I've been painting professionally for a long time. I started selling my paintings when I was 17 in professional galleries. So I have a lot of insights about painting, and especially about what can help a painting to sell versus not sell. But even then, nobody even knows that. There's so often when I put a painting into a gallery and I'm debating, I don't know, this one's just, I really don't know that I like this painting. Put it in there and boom, it sells immediately. And then when I'm just so excited about it, I think, I captured exactly what I wanted to capture, and it just takes forever, or it doesn't sell at all. So there are a lot of variables involved in the art world where we just don't know We just don't know very much. So there are certain principles, though, underlying principles in art that are very helpful. There are no actual rules. When you hear somebody say, you didn't follow the rules or whatever, what about this rule? The rule of never putting the horizon line in the middle of a painting. You can ignore most of what they have to say, because it sounds like they're probably narrow-minded, very myopic in their view of art, and take what they say with a very small grain of salt, or big grain of salt, however that works, if I'm thinking about that backwards. So the point to all this is, art has so much capacity for experimentation and unique viewpoints. And each one of us is different from one another. What appeals to one doesn't necessarily appeal to another. That's why there's so many different styles in art. It's not that one style is better than another or stronger or anything like that. It has to do with our particular view of the world. And that's another reason why the art world is just such a fantastic thing to be a part of, because there is all that variety, and there's so much to explore and still so much to learn. So it's very helpful when somebody has a lot of experience and they've done this every day for years and years and years. I had excellent teachers in college, and one of them is the painting back here. That was one of my painting professors, and I just adored the way he painted. I just loved it. When he would demonstrate for us, I found it very exciting to watch him demonstrate how he painted, and I wanted to do what he did at that time. And I did that for a long time. The first 6 years were really a lot along the lines of what my professor taught me as far as his painting style. It was more the Russian impressionist style, very vigorous, broad brushstrokes, bravura type stuff. But then I started to transition, not because I thought that wasn't a good way to paint. It's just that there were other things I wanted to explore. So when we're going through doing these critiques, keep in mind that these are suggestions. They might be helpful, and they might just spur ideas and other directions for you to go. They might give you some insights about, oh, you know what, that's a possibility. Not exactly the way that Bill just showed me here, but I can now see that it might take me this direction, and I like that idea. Follow your gut, follow your instincts on this. And if you find what I share here helpful, then run with it. If you don't, then don't do it. Don't take that and think, oh, I have to do this. There are no have-tos here. And I am by no means perfect about any of this. So with that caveat, we'll get started with this. We have 14 critiques today. We only have the 14 submissions this time. Sometimes that happens. And part of that, I think, is because we were a week early. And I think a lot of members didn't realize that. Some months we have way more than we can do, past the 15 mark. And some months it's just like this. So I think a lot of it has to do with everybody wanting to get outside now that they've been so cooped up. And we have a little bit more freedom to go and explore. So, all right, so let's get started. Share my screen here. I can find the share. There we go. All right. Showing the screen. And nope, wrong direction. There we go. Got it. Okay, so we're going to be starting with Ed's piece. So in each of these paintings that you're going to see today, every one of them has something phenomenal about it. And that's really the way it is, even among professional artists. If you really look rather than being starstruck by some of this work out there, really look at it, and if we broke down most professional artists' work, they're going to be really good at one or more things, but there's always going to be some weakness in every artist's work. That's just the nature of being human. We have a limited capacity. Well, okay, I can't say that. We have an incredible capacity to learn and to advance in the way that in our understanding and that sort of thing. But we're limited by time. There's only so much time, and there's a lot to explore in art. So remember that when we're going through this, I might be pointing out some of the things that can be possibly made stronger, but there's so much in each one of these that is just beautiful. And so don't ever get discouraged by your seeming weaknesses, because we all have those weaknesses. We all have weaknesses of some sort. So we're all in this together and going through the same struggles. Okay, so Ed, I love your sky is very dramatic looking, and it just I don't know, it's like some great movie event or something like that, where we're just going, it's like there's this tremendous thing that's going to happen, sort of thing. So really cool looking sky, Ed. And then I love how you did the this reflection in the water down here. Very, very soft and beautiful water effect in there. And I am excited, Ed, that you are playing so much with paint texture. Really, oftentimes it's the texture of the paint that separates what we do as artists from photography. There's so much, especially when we see the paintings in person. It's not nearly as evident when we're looking at a photograph of something, but when we're there in person and we see that actual texture of that paint in there, there's something tangible about that as an expression, the expressive ability of paint texture. So the more we experiment with that, I think the stronger we can make the message that we're trying to show in our paintings. So, all right. You have some wonderful contrast in here, Ed, with the water. So if you see me doing this, I'm squinting all the time to look at values and other things like that. So, well, actually, mostly just the value relationships is what it is. It's not the actual, when you squint, you're not getting the actual value of something because it's darkening everything. But we're getting value relationships. It's simplifying the overall masses. It's taking out a lot of that superfluous detail that can be distracting, and it's getting down to the basic value relationships. And that's really what it's all about. Is values are probably the top two things to pay attention to. Is one, drawing needs to be accurate. If for the most part. Now we can get away with it in some instances, depending on the style that we're painting in. But the better our drawing skills, the more possibilities we have for successful expression, personal expression, whatever message we're trying to convey. The better our drawing skills, the better we're going to be able to convey that, in no matter what style we're working in. But most especially in realism, drawing is just critical in realism, especially when it comes to perspective, whether it's aerial perspective or linear perspective or anything like that. Getting that so that everything is consistent throughout the painting is very helpful when it comes to realism. So, so the second one though is value relationships, and it's how in a lot of when we're first starting out painting, oftentimes we're timid, and that shows up in our values. We tend to get them so that most of the values are the same, and nothing really stands out because we're afraid of contrast. I'm not sure why that is, but contrast seems to lack when we're first starting because of that timidity in wanting to really commit ourselves to something. So Ed, you've got a lot of really strong contrast in here, and I love that. Now, some of the areas that where the contrast is getting lost is down here. Let me grab my red brush so you can see what I'm doing. All right. Down here, Ed, like, you know what, that's not big enough, is it? It's too much. In the area like in here, you have some color changes in there and slight value shifts, but for the most part, the values are all the same within those areas. Like this area over here, the values are pretty much the same from top to bottom. Over here, to a great degree, the values are the same from top to bottom, except for something like this. You have a really dark spot, and then a really light spot, and then a dark spot, and then a light spot. So what that's doing is, rather than feeling like there's light and shadow, it just feels like this is a really dark shadowed bush, and this a dark colored bush, more overall a darker value kind of coloration in that bush, and this is a lighter value coloration. But within those colors, like within this light right here of this bush, there's no value change. There's no value shift. So what that does to it, Ed, is it makes it a flat object. It's as if somebody took a piece of cardboard and painted it green and stuck it there in the landscape. It doesn't feel like a bush. It just feels like a flat piece of color that's in there. So if you're wanting to have, which it looks like from the rest of the painting, you do want to have that three-dimensional quality to it, then coming into each one of those objects, like whether it's a bush or a rock or a tree, and having areas where just the way to think about it is, where's my light source, and how is that light source affecting this particular object, this particular shape? And then take that shape, and where the light source is hitting it more fully, we have the brighter areas of value and color, and where it's not hitting so much, where it's getting down into the shadow areas, that's where we have the darker values. And that's how we create that illusion of three-dimensional shape and form. So with each one of these, I love the variety that you're getting in there. Just remember, if you're trying to create a three-dimensional quality to them, to do that, to think in terms of, and if you're having trouble thinking about that, because you might be making it up, it might be from your imagination, you don't have any reference image for it, then take anything. Take a ball, or make a ball. Get some clay. There are a lot of artists like James Gurney. I just drew a blank on Daniel Sprick. They will actually take and make models of what they're doing. Or, I mean, they do all kinds of things. Daniel Sprick, he doesn't have to for the most part, because he does everything from life. He sets up these elaborate still lifes that he works from. But you'll notice, if you look at his paintings, he'll have like something floating in the air. Obviously, he doesn't just have something floating like that. So he does have to use his imagination a bit, or he rigs something up for that. But even still, getting something, some kind of object, like taking a glass case or whatever, and putting a light on it, putting it somewhere where it has a distinct light source. Look at how that creates shadows and light, and squint at it and see where the brightest area is, where it's not as bright, and where it's dark. And then within the dark areas, look at where it's really dark and where it's just kind of dark. So within shadows, we have areas where it's really dark, like there's the absence of light, there's not really any light in there at all. And then we have other areas within the shadow that are not quite that dark, but they start to transition towards the light. And then we have the half-tone area where it's kind of like the transition between shadow and light. And then we have the area where it's getting a lot of light, but it's not where the light is shining most brilliantly, and that's the highlight area. So think of every object, every shape within your painting in those terms, and that will help a lot with light and shadow. Okay, the other things that stood out to me, Ed, here are, and I didn't work a lot with individual objects with light and shadow. I'm just pointing that out to you. But with like this right here, that line going across there, I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a something like it almost looks like the mountain comes down here, and then suddenly it cuts in, and there's this big like area that goes into the mountain where it's been cut away, like a big saw came along there and cut that area away, or just a big slab of the whole mountain got cut off, fell off of there, and we have this ridge going back under the mountain, and the light's being blocked from it. That's what it looks like, because it looks like a shadow under there. So I don't know what that is, and I did basically get rid of that, just because of that ambiguity. And then same thing with your trees back here, Ed. It comes down to the same thing: light and shadow. The value and the value and color is the same from left to right and almost top to bottom. You do have this down here that's light, mostly white in color down there, but I don't know exactly what that is. It could be tree trunks, it could be grass. I'm not sure what that is, but it doesn't affect what has happened up here, which is mostly the same value from top to bottom and left to right. So that's what I mostly focused on in the painting here, Ed, was working on some of that. It's kind of the same thing in your mountain up here. You have some beautiful variety in here with the striated color, but the striated color is the same in all the different planes of that mountain. So rather than saying that this plane, like taking this one right here and saying that is really facing the light, you do have a little bit of it. And this is where we see it the most, Ed, is in this one. So take that as basically the standard for what's in your painting. We feel like this one comes out away from the mountain because this is a little bit brighter in value, and this seems a little darker in value. So you have some of that right there. But let me show you what I did with that. And then this cloud right here, just to be aware, everything comes down to shapes. And this shape right here feels a lot like the shape of your mountain. See that? They're very similar in shape. So I just broke that up so it doesn't distract from what seems to be the center of attention, which is basically the mountain right there, because it's the thing that everything hones us into. Okay, so here are the changes I made, Ed. I did come into the bushes and break them up because you had kind of a repetitive pattern going on with light, dark, light. It's like a green, orangish, dark brown, green, orangish, dark brown, and it just kind of went in a pattern like that. So I tried to break up the pattern using the colors that you already had in there, but making them so that they're not quite so predictable in their repetition. And I didn't do a lot with any of this. Oops. Layer with this right here or this right here. I focused more on this down here, the reflections in the water, which were really strong, very hard-edged and really thick and strong. And to me, Ed, those reflections, the ripples, the highlight ripples in the water were almost distracting from the mountain and the things that you had in the background. So what I did was, oops, sorry about that. I took the half the trees right here and worked on those and left the other half the way they were so you could see the difference between the two. And so now if you really look at this, these trees over here now look like they are almost all in shadow, as if this group of trees over here is catching all of the light and blocking the shadow from getting to those other trees. So you see how that works with light and shadow. When we have something that's just dark like that, it just makes it look like everything there is out of the light, that no light is hitting on it at all. And so then I took this right here, some of these, and gave them variety, really is what it was, and tried to make areas where sun is coming forward, like really focusing on some of the cuts in the mountain that you had in there, turning those into areas where you have the really dark area right here, where if the light is coming this direction, then the light is being blocked from that side, but there's some transitional shadows in here, like some bluish, some cooler areas there where it's getting that cast shadow on there. So it's kind of like a transition between the two, and it makes it feel like, and putting the brightest area on here on the edge of that. So that gives it that illusion of depth, where this is coming towards the viewer and the shadow area is moving back a little bit away from it. And it just makes it feel like there's some change in the depth from one area of the mountain to another. Let's see, and same thing, I really did that on this one here, creating a cast shadow onto the other mountain back here so that it looks like this is coming out away from the viewer and away from the other part of the mountain. And that's just to give it some variety. With your cloud up here, I didn't take away the whole shape, I just kind of softened some of it down. And I kept a lot of this sort of thing in here. I love that you have those reflections or the ripples in the water that are catching that reflected light, but just not so dramatic, so strong, to make it feel a little bit more natural in there, especially along the bank right here, where it was really strong white on both sides. So generally speaking, the bank that's on this side, the bushes that you had in there looked like they'd be fairly significant in size. And so what I did was I just made them more bushy, and which means that it's going to obscure, because the viewer going this direction, looking this way, it's going to obscure a lot of the bank of the lake right there from the viewer, because the bushes are coming up over that bank, and that helps to create that illusion of the viewer's viewpoint, where we're at and what we can see. And then focus the highlight sort of thing a little bit less vigorous on there, not quite so much like we had here, where it's really strong white along here and right there. So you don't have to get rid of this bank right here. That was just something that I was experimenting with in there. But as far as the white goes, what that's doing is it becomes so, the contrast is so strong, and the white is such a cool color that it really demands a lot of attention, and it makes it hard to focus on anything else in the painting. So just got rid of that. Oops. There we go. And that would be it. Tone down like the white that is over here at the base of those trees. Instead of having just white, I had tried to put in more of a variety of areas. So what I thought of, Ed, was if the light is coming this direction, then that means on the back of the tree there's going to be a shadow area. So I put in the shadow areas in between some of these. And so we have areas where they're really light and it comes all the way down to the ground, and then other areas where we have tree trunks coming down, things like that in here, a tree trunk over here, and then other areas where it's really about variety. So this whole area here is more in shadow because there aren't really any trees coming out towards us, rather than a tree here, 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 all the way down, trees in uniform row. It's about getting a less predictable nature to them, so that we have breaks in the trees like this. We have smaller breaks in the trees, some areas where there are really no breaks hardly in the trees, that sort of thing. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about, Ed, as I went along with that. Okay, and that was it. So excellent job. It's really a pretty painting, Ed. And I hope that helps as you move forward with it. Okay, Gail. So Gail, your pot, it looks like one of those glass jars with the lid that hinges up like that. I think that is a lot of fun to look at. So it does feel stylized, and so in the way that I went about this, I made some changes with the idea that you might want more three-dimensional quality to it, but that is not to say that you should have more three-dimensional quality to it. I just did what I did in case that's the direction you want to go. I was kind of showing you what that would look like if you went in more of a three-dimensional light and dark, or light and shadow kind of form to it. But don't take that as yeah, you really should do this, because there's no should. There's a lot of really beautiful, they call it folk art, but art is art to me. So, but it's that it's kind of like in music. There's folk music, there's country, there's rock, there's adult, contemporary, or whatever. You know, all these different. We try to put them into certain classifications. That doesn't mean that everything fits neatly into those classifications, but it is helpful to know kind of. It gives us an idea of some of the things we're thinking about, things that we value, things that we're trying to achieve with our work, and the kind of audience that we're trying to appeal to as well. So when I say something like folk art, I don't mean it in a demeaning way by any means. I love folk music. I like certain rock music. I like certain country music. So there's a wide gamut of music that I like, no matter what genre it's classified into. At the same time, there's a lot of art that I like in so many different categories: expressionism, abstractionism, all that sort of thing. So, okay, so in thinking about that, realize that I'm not telling you to change your style by any means. If you're trying to go in more of what we have right now, if we go with the way it is at the moment, let's just take it from there. Your values and color are the same from top to bottom, left to right. And we've already discussed what that does. It flattens the shape. So what we end up with is this flat, two-dimensional form in our painting. If we want to have more of a three-dimensional form where it feels like light and shadow, that's when we start to add light and shadow. But sometimes people want to work in that two-dimensional flat format. So in this, with that, I just like the whimsical feeling in your vase, in your container right there. So let's see. So now let's get to the principles that we can discuss in here. Okay, the drawing is first. And what's happening right now, Gail, is because of the curve that goes up like this. See how you come down on this side like this, and then it comes across right here? Well, on this one, it comes down over here and then curves from up there. Do you see the difference? The one starts up here with the curve, the other starts down here with the curve. That's what's making the vase feel like it's tilting upward like this. So what we need to do is bring both ends of the curve to the same plane. All right, so basically bring both down to, if we have the one right here, the other should be right here. So that would mean that the drawing comes down like this, and then the curve starts here. And by curve, I mean the bottom of the vase. So we have one here, and we should have one here. And that will help it feel like it's flat, like it's actually on a flat surface, and it's not tilting awkwardly in some way. That comes down to perspective and getting the drawing correct on there. Okay, so the other thing, Gail, is that I love the color that you have in here and in the flower. But again, we have that flat, even though you have some of these, the white added to it right here for some of that texture. I really like the texture that you have in there, but that texture isn't really changing the overall value. If you squint at it, the value still basically remains the same from top to bottom, left to right, all directions. The actual shape of it is flat because the value is all the same. So this is where we get into how can we think about what's the first step in adding light and shadow into this, if that's what we're wanting to do. And the first thing to do is to determine where the light source is coming from. So if we take a light source and we say it's coming down like this direction, then that can tell us that there's going to be shadow over on this side and more light over on this side. Does that make sense? And it'll be the same no matter what we're talking about. It'll be the same with the rose. It'll be the same with the leaves. So like, let's say we come down and the light is coming this direction, right? Well, then that means that this flower right here is going to block the light on this stem right here in as much as, unless the light is coming from the bottom up. If the light's coming from the top down, like that, then this is going to be darker. And it might be that that maybe the light is over here to the side a bit, like this, so that the bottom of that stem actually gets some light on it, but the top up here that's right underneath the flower doesn't get any light at all. And now we got a big mess there. Let me get rid of all that. So that's where we get that variety that we're talking about, where it'll be darker in one area because there's no light hitting it, and we might get some light down here where the light comes across and hits on that part of it. And we can do that with all the leaves as well. Like you have this little leaf right here. It might block some of the light from hitting on this leaf right over here. This leaf right here might be completely in shadow because it's getting behind the flower right here. And this leaf right here might actually come out into the light because it's not getting much in the way of, and this might be fully in the light because it might be all bright and lit up because it's out in the light. Maybe it's coming forward and this other one's pushing back, and one's pushing back into the shadow of the flower and the other one's out here in full sunlight. Does that make sense? So, or full whatever light source it is. So that's how we can think about light and shadow and where to put darker areas and where to put lighter. We don't want to just put in arbitrary values of dark and light just so that we have variety. We want to think through what's causing the shadow and what's causing the light. And that's how we can determine where to put light and shadow. The other thing that stood out to me, Gail, was the background, because it's that kind of brighter, strong, saturated red. It's a beautiful color back there, but it's competing with the pinks in the rose. The rose right now is standing out because everything is so bright. It's so light in contrast compared to the background, but the colors of them are kind of coming together, and that's going to diminish the impact of the flower. Now, sometimes people want to do that. They'll intentionally take the background and make it very similar in value and coloration to the main subject. And that's because they have some particular intention behind it. But if you want your flower to come forward more, then something that you can do to it is to take that background and maybe add a green glaze over it, or even a scumbling where you add, it's not quite so dark. You might add a little bit of white or a lighter colored pigment into your glazing, and you scumble over it instead. So these are the things that I did here, Gail. Okay, so I took the, first of all, I added light. When we're talking about light and shadow, the same thing's going to apply to every element in the painting, unless we have some reason we don't want it to, and then we can change it. But if you notice, I added lighter areas to the table here and a shadow area behind the vase, because I have my light source coming kind of this direction or down like this sort of direction, so that the vase is actually blocking the light behind it. Then I pushed the background even farther back, made it darker in value, so that now and I added a greenish glaze. Not real, it's not like I wanted it to be green where it felt green. You notice it still has that reddish warmth to the background, but the red isn't so strong that it takes away from the flower. And that was really the intent there. So we've got that darker background back there, not dark all the way around. I didn't want just a black background all the way. You notice on this side of it, I have the light is hitting more on this side, and it gets darker back here behind. So that's one possibility for increasing the illusion, helping to pull the flower forward and push the background back. And now the background simply is a backdrop that is helping the flower to be the real star of the show. With the leaves, I took and I'm actually, my light source isn't really coming down from this way. It's more coming this direction, like in front of it, a little bit to the left, and that direction. All right. So I took the leaves and I how the way that leaves aren't perfectly flat. A lot of times they have kind of that curve to them a bit, especially through the middle right here. They slant away. Well, that's what I did there. I tried to take one half and make it a little bit darker, and one half more in the light, just for some variety in there. And then with something like this leaf right here, I put it mostly in the shadow, with a little bit of light hitting on the upper part of that stem right there. I forgot to do this. I did not get that into shadow because I just forgot about it. Sorry about that, Gail. But I also took the idea of light and shadow, putting some shadow into the inside of the pot there, and behind the stem right here onto that. The stem is blocking the light. Some shadow over on this side of the pot, and then especially when we get down to the bottom of the pot. First of all, softening the edge of that is going to help it feel more natural. And then it gets darker as it curves away from the light, it gets darker. But that doesn't mean that we lose the drawing that's in there. So you notice I brought the drawing of it down, and then it starts to curve around here so that both of these are basically on the same plane. See that? We want to keep the two bottom parts of that pot as it curves around on the same plane. If this is flat, if the table is flat, now if the table is curving up, that changes the dynamic, that changes the perspective. But as long as it's on a flat table and both sides of the table are on the same basic angle, then the drawing will show that. And that's so those were the things that I focused on. I did not do anything to the flower because flowers are difficult. And I spent a lot of time on the rest of it. It could have taken me several more hours just to do the flower itself. So that's why I didn't tackle the flower, Gail, because even though a lot of people will, when we start painting, they'll just do flowers because flowers are so pretty. And that's a nice thing to do, but flowers are not an easy subject. Anyone who says something like, "Oh, you paint flowers, how nice." No, they obviously haven't painted flowers before. So I wasn't able to tackle the flower, but use the same principles that we did with the rest of the painting when it comes to your flower. Think in terms of where the petals are facing and how the light is hitting on one compared to another. All right. So it's really a fun painting, Gail. Keep going with it. It's beautiful. So, and Christy looks like.
Letting you know that you're 45 minutes into it with 2 paintings done, so.
That sounds about right. That's because, okay, so Christy's reminding me of the time. A lot of times I'm covering a lot of these principles in the very first ones and trying to get a lot of that out of the way, especially for newer people. So it does take longer for the first 2 than it will for the rest of them. But it's a good reminder that I need to move along. Okay, Gal, so beautiful piece, and keep going with it. Remember, never get discouraged about this. We all start out exactly in the same spot, and you're doing great. There's a lot of really fun, beautiful stuff in this painting, Gal. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, Jane. So Jane has, she sent me a newer image of this. So here's the newer image. It's much better. You can see the texture in the paint and all that. But Jane, I had already finished the critique before I got your new image. So sorry about that. And there was no way for me to transfer it to this one. I would have had to start all over again. And it took me hours, so I just couldn't do that. Sorry about that, Jane. But I wanted to show that for everybody so you can see that there is a difference in the photography between the two. But the principles will still be the same. So that's what we're going to go with. All right, so beautiful piece. I love just so much painterly quality in your pieces, Jane. Really pretty. Okay, so first of all, I love the way, I've been a fan of Jane's. She really has a lot of gusto in the way that she paints, and I love that. So let's see. I love the color in here, beautiful flowers, and all that variety that you have in here, Jane, is really pretty. Like these reds in here, the yellows, the oranges, the salmon colors, all of that, just so nice to look at. Oops, wrong thing. Okay, so things that stood out to me so that we can move along more quickly. The things that stood out, Jane, is that most of the flowers are right there in kind of a big circle. And then I'm not sure if there was a reason for it. You have a little bit of a flower coming off the edge of the painting right there. But otherwise, like this one, it stops right before you get to the edge of the painting right there. It's as if you just couldn't let it go over the edge of it. And yet what happens is when we confine ourselves in like that and we don't have anything coming off the edges, it makes it feel like it's a little bit, for some, almost like a claustrophobic kind of thing. Sorry, I forgot this watch makes noise. I have that on my phone on mute, but this is not. It's kind of that claustrophobic feeling to it, and what it's really doing is it's saying that there are no flowers on either side of it. It's just right here. So it can often help to create a more expansive feeling, and for the viewer, help them to feel like they have more area to explore. I know it's just their imagination because they can't actually see. It's not like they can look around the corner of the painting and see beyond the edges, but in our minds, we can start to envision all these other flowers that are growing all around, and it creates a more expansive view for the viewer, for the audience. So you have some wonderful dark, like in here, dark shadow areas. I love all the variety of warm and cool greens that you have in here, blue greens, yellow greens. You have a beautiful variety of colors in there, Jane. But when it comes to like we have this one big area here, a little bit of a shadow area over here, but a lot of what's happening in here, like the flowers themselves, the values of the flowers themselves are all the same for the most part. They have some light, they have some different values within each flower, but each flower has the same overall variety of light and dark within them. Whether we're talking about one that's down here or the one that's up here, they're a little bit different in value, but not so much that we think that. Basically, it feels like they're all on the same plane. Whereas when I have a big rose hedge out here in front of our house, and you'll have some flowers that grow back in the recesses a little bit, some flowers that come out more. The flowers that come out more are going to catch much more light than the flowers that are back in here. And some of those flowers that are back in here, they get the light obscured almost entirely. That drastically changes the value of those flowers and the color. So this is what I did to them. I took and added more, and I don't know that the bright is really necessary, Jane. It was more just to give you an idea of what would happen if you added more stronger contrast of value. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the best direction to go compared to this. So really it was to help to emphasize some of the like these areas right here. It makes them by relativity darker than they were before without actually changing the value of those, so that we have some of those recessed areas and we have the areas coming out forward. Now you could do the same thing just by darkening up as well, like putting a glaze over some of the other areas if you don't want the really bright kind of leaves like that. But that was the idea. Oops. So the other thing was I took some flowers like here and put a glaze over those to darken them down a little bit and heightened up, or made it feel heightened, some of the other flowers. The other thing I did was break up that big circle of flowers right here, like areas like this, taking out some of the flowers that you have in there so that it becomes more of a movement. It's like it's more like this going through it rather than a boom, like this sort of thing, where we all of a sudden just congregate all into the same area. It helps to allow the viewer to move from, because you have so many flowers in so many different spots, it actually creates a better freedom of movement like this than it did before. Rather than, boom, we kind of glance at stuff out here, but we really come into this area, it takes that away a bit and gives it more variety. And then I added a flower just like this. See, like that one right there? Just adding a flower over to the side that's coming off of the edge of the painting creates that expansive feeling. And I added a little bit more of it down over here. You had a slight bit of it. I increased that more so that you really do get that feeling of it's going off in all directions, and there are just flowers everywhere. Okay, and that was it. Let's see, what, if I go back and forth, this helps a little bit. Oh, so I did tone down a little bit, Jane, the white, rather than white as a highlight on there, which is possible to use white. I try, even with a white flower, I rarely use white straight from the tube as a highlight on a white flower. Usually I'll have some color in it, whether it's cad lemon or something like that. So in this case, I did add, as you can see, more of a lemon yellow color to it, just to give it some punch. It warms it up, it makes it feel more inviting. It actually is much more, the viewer will feel a closer kinship with it than when it's white, because white is so cold and distant, and it's really the absence of color. So we tend to like color in things, you know, color in our cheeks or whatever. We like to have some color because it feels like it's more life in it. So just I just came in and put a glaze over those of more of a scumble rather than a glaze, because it still has that light pigment or white in it, but took away the white everywhere. And that was it. So I hope that's helpful. You notice like flowers down here, you can barely see them, but we know that they're there, and that really pushes those into the recesses. And it makes the area up top up here feel, even by contrast, by relativity, it makes those feel even brighter than they did before because of the areas that are darker. So we need that dark and light combination. It's kind of the same thing. We going back to movies, there has to be a villain. Generally speaking, we're not going to watch a movie where it's just the good guys and they're just kind of going about daily life. It's wonderful to think about, and it would be a wonderful environment to live in where it was just the good guys all the time. But there's always dark and light, always that contrast. And in landscape, that contrast, that relativity, is just light and shadow, and it's giving us the opportunities to feel that three-dimensional quality that exists in life. So beautiful piece, wonderful painterly quality, Jane, and really pretty. Thank you very much for that. Okay, Jean, these plums, oops, sorry about that. Well, this is a lot smaller file, as you can see by the size of the brush there. So, that's reasonable. Okay, these plums right here, Jean, are masterfully done. Those are just beautiful. Really, really well done. And the shadows over here, oops. But this shadow over here, that is just amazing, Jean. Really amazing. You have this, if you, I can't bring it up too big because the file is so small, it'll just pixelate out. But you have this wonderful halftone area. You've got that transitional shadow to light area in there, and it's really beautifully done. It's very soft. It's not hard-edged. It feels entirely natural. And so kudos on that, just so well done. And I love your plums here. They really have that natural rounding feeling to them. So excellently done. Okay, so the things that stood out to me, I love all the colors in here. The flowers, everything in here is just beautiful coloration, beautiful paint texture back in here and throughout the flowers and all these areas in here. The things that I thought you might want to look at, the table right here, because of this transitional area, it's actually working against you as far as the flattening of that plane. What's happening right now is because of the dark areas, like right here, going to this light area back here, it's actually making that plane feel like it's almost like it's curling up towards the viewer rather than flattening out and going away from the viewer. It's curling up, so or curving up, if you couldn't understand what word I was using. So I worked on that. You are focusing beautifully on light and shadow, where you've got lighter out here and then you got more shadow area over here. I did emphasize that a little bit more, but mainly what I was doing is I was trying to break up the shape of that right there a little bit, so that especially as you get out towards the edges, it just feels like there's more, you can see through areas more. And then that shadow on the back of the box, I actually struggled with that a lot. I went in there with a dark shadow, kind of like what you had right here, as if the flowers were right up against that wall and they were casting a very strong shadow on that wall. And I played with that a lot, Gene, and it just didn't feel right no matter how many times I did it. I tried all these different configurations, different values, different warm and cool color temperatures with it, and it just did not feel right. So what I did was I changed the whole direction of it. And this is what I did with it. I lightened it up. I just took the shadow out entirely, because right now, the shadow here is, the color of it just feels unnatural. It doesn't feel like a shadow as much as it feels like some dirty smudge on the back of the wall, back behind the flowers. And it actually distracts from everything else in the painting. And it demands a lot of attention, and I don't think you want the attention going there. So, that's right. So instead, I just took that out, and and actually, this is still too bright. All this right here around these flowers is too bright. I would darken that a little bit, but not like it was a cast shadow so much as just a transitional tone. I'm not quite sure why I left it so bright, but that bugs me too. So I wouldn't leave it bright like that, but something where, like, I love this. I love over here where you have that transitioning from the warmer to the cooler color temperature. I think that's just beautifully done right there. So something like that, where we're going from the really lighter area over here to something darker over here. And I think after I did so many different iterations of it, that I just didn't think of getting the correct value in there. So I'm sorry about that, Gene. I did bring in a couple of spots in here, like right there, here, just to kind of break those flowers up a little bit as well, but not quite so much. And especially Christy came in and said some of the dark around these flowers is really helpful just to bring those forward some. So we left some of that in there. I added a couple of shadows down here on the box, the same as what you did here. I was doing kind of this sort of thing where the light's coming down, and like from this leaf right here, it's casting a shadow back here on the box. And the farther away that we move a shadow from the actual object, like, let me show you. So in this case, like this leaf right here, I didn't mess up. So we've got this leaf right here like that, right? But the shadow is over here. So if we want an object to feel like it's coming away from another object, one way to do that is to, instead of putting the shadow right behind it, we put the shadow over to the side like this and away, so that it makes it feel like the leaf is over here, the shadow is over here. That means that there's a space between the two. If we want it to feel like the object is right against something, then we just have a little bit of shadow around it, and it's right. It feels like it's right underneath that object. So if we want the leaf to feel as if it is right up against the box, then we would put the shadow right here along the edge of it. If we want to make the leaf feel like it's coming away from it, we move the shadow away from the object. So that's one technique, and that's why I did that, was just to show you that technique, that idea. Actually, it's more of a principle, I guess, than a technique. So like in this case where you have the plum here, with your shadow right behind it like that and connecting to it, then that tells me that the plum then is right up against the box. Now, if we were trying to say that the plum, let's say, was out here, then we would have maybe the plum like this right here. And I can't do anything with a mouse. Sorry, I need to learn how to use my tablet. I have this wonderful Wacom tablet, but I've never taken the time to learn how to use that pen, and it's kind of tricky. So I'm still working with a mouse, and it doesn't work very well for me. Okay, so we put a plum in here. If we wanted that plum to feel like it was out here away from the box, then we would do that, and maybe the shadow would be out like this sort of thing, away from the plum instead of right next to the plum. So that's how we get that. That's how we create a feeling of depth if we want that in there. All right, and that really was it. Now, you can take some of the same things that we've already talked about, Gene, when it comes to light and dark, and apply it with your flowers. In some of the flowers, you have some wonderful light on them, and then others that are in the dark. You can also do that within each flower, like with the red ones right here, these red and orange flowers. Really, the value of them, if I squint down, each individual flower is really about the same value from left to right, top to bottom, all of that. It's one flat shape because we don't have really any shadow like rounding, like you did with the plums. There's really none of that rounding of any of the flowers. So that would be something that I would think about as well in terms of bringing some light and shadow to the flowers. And that's really what I did over here with this flower, was putting that into shadow as if it's back behind this big red flower right there. Those are the ways to think about it as far as where to apply some of that. Okay, and that was it. Otherwise, it's really, really a pretty piece, Gene. So beautiful. All right, next, Linda. So this is always like sunset scenes, but especially, Linda, what stood out to me is this sky, and much bigger file. This sky up here is just beautiful. Those transitions of color, really soft, and they just flow together, and yet you have the colors that you have in there, the lavenders and blues and yellows and oranges, they all work so well with one another. It's really pretty. So, and I love the reflections down here in the water, the reflective quality over here in the lake. You have a wonderful feeling. I know right off when I'm looking at it that we have a lake here, and the land over here. All the shapes are really have a distinct character to them. So excellent job there. Okay, so things that stood out to me. One is the curve of this. It kind of all of a sudden curves down over here. So I worked on that, getting rid of that curve. And also, this is so dark back here, and I know that can happen, but I wonder what it would be like if it's not just dark, it's also pretty warm in color temperature. You have a little bit of lavender in there, Linda, but overall it's really almost as warm as anything that you have over here close to the viewer. And yet I feel like that's a long way away from the viewer. Like the lake is a pretty big lake, and that's going way off into the distance. So to create that, I did cool that down. And then you have you've gone so far with getting away more from the white as a highlight, but you still have some of that to a great degree right here in these rocks. And they're so strong in contrast and cool in color temperature that they are distracting me from the sunset. So in reality, what would happen with those rocks is that the light, that really warm light coming from that sunset, would be reflecting on those really bright planes of those rocks. And it would actually warm up a lot of what you're seeing in there. Whereas right now, all I see are cooler planes. What that tells me is that every one of the faces of those rocks that's catching so much light is actually turned away from the main warm light source, which is the sun, and it's catching ambient light from the sky. But it's catching so much ambient light that it makes it almost feel like it's some kind of bright reflected light getting onto there. Because when it's twilight like that, there's so little light up here that it's probably not going to catch nearly that much bright light at this time of day, and especially that much cool light. More than likely, we're going to have at least some of those planes of those rocks that are going to catch some warm light onto them. So that's one. Those are some of the things that I focused on. The other thing is just the yellow in the water right here. There's so much of it. I wondered what it would be like to play with that a bit, because it looks like you have movement in the water, like all these ripple kind of movements in there. And so I decided to play with that a little bit because you have these beautiful, cool lavenders and blues up in the sky up here, but none of that really down in the water, except for maybe just a hint right here and almost a hint over here, but it's still very much more of a warmer tone over there. So I played with that. This is what we came up with. Took the, you can see, especially down at the very bottom of the hill back here, I brought in more of those bluish tones. They're still darker in value. So I didn't completely get rid of the dark nature of it, because obviously the light is coming behind that. It's setting behind that hill back in the distance, or the mountain in the distance. So it's silhouetted, which it's going to make that shape darker. But I did lighten it a little bit in value, so it wasn't so strong in contrast, and brought more. And what that does, it also helps the darkness of this area here to be darker than the one that's in the background, which brings it forward and pushes the other back into the distance away from the viewer. I also toned down, I brought in, as these rocks go towards the light, away from the viewer, I put in more of the warm highlights on those. And as it comes away from the viewer, that's when they get a little cooler in color temperature, because it's actually curving away from the light and more into the shadows. It might still be catching a little bit of ambient light, but I greatly diminished or darkened the value of those as they go away from the main source of light, because the ambient light coming down on it is not going to be very bright, because it's twilight and most of the light is going away. So keeping the rocks over here, you can still see the individual rocks like you had them, but in a much darker shadow format. And then as they come out towards the light, we get more of those warm highlights on it. I also softened the very edge of this, the point of that peninsula as it comes into the water. And then you can see here with the water, I did add, just to see what it would be like, just so you could see what it would be like, I added a little bit brighter, like white with some cad lemon in it, to the, not a lot of it, but just a streak of it, just for some variety in there, into this. And then added a little tiny bit of that into the water as well. But I also added some blues into here for the reflection of this shape right here down into the water. And then took the lavender that's up in the sky up here and brought some of that as a like reflection kind of quality over the top of the water, so that it gives us that feeling of water and the way that light plays on the top of the water. I'm taking the lavenders, so we get that cool and warm contrast, or cool and warm harmony in there. So you can see some of those lavenders, just like not like a solid film over it, although I did do some of that too, but more like the kind of that pattern of ripples in the water is what I was doing. And then softened to a great degree the shadow right here, or the reflection of that dark shape in the water. I made it lighter as we come out towards the light, and a little bit darker, but even then as it gets darker, the real dark part of it is going to be more where the water comes right to the edge of that. And then as it comes away, it softens out as it comes more and more out into the water. So those are some of the things that I focused on in that. And that was it. I did pull the the mountain, instead of having it end right here, I pulled it all the way across here so that it feels like it's, you know, really a long stretch of land, and it actually will distract less from the idea of the sunset than if you have it come down and it becomes just this shape that suddenly stops. If you continue the shape across, the shape actually it diminishes the attention that shape demands from the viewer and allows us to focus more on the sunset. So that was it. Beautiful piece, Linda, really pretty. Has a beautiful feeling in it. And this out here, none of this really distracted me at all. I felt that you did that perfectly. It just works tremendously well. So sometimes things like that, they're so hard to handle because they easily become overbearing, like too dark, too light, too distractive. But I feel like all of your foliage just leads me in very gently and naturally into the main area of the painting. So I didn't see any reason to adjust any of that at all. It feels very natural as we move into it. All right, so great job, beautiful piece. Okay, Linda. So this one, I love these flowers. They're really pretty. And I didn't know that flowers really grew on like that, on cactus like that. So I didn't look up to see if that's, you know, if there's anything with cactus like that. I'm sure you live in an area where that's where they grow. So I just went with that. The way that they're growing, I'm not sure how they're growing on the cactus. I don't actually have a lot of experience with flowers on cactus. So like this flower right here, Linda, oops, wrong one. Oh, crumb. Did I already bring that up? Sorry about that. That's what it should have been. So here's the original. Okay, so Linda, I don't know how this is attached over here. If this flower right here goes to this cactus or to this cactus. I'm assuming it goes to this cactus, but it's in front of this cactus right here. So I'm not sure how that works. Also, this flower right here, is there like some kind of a stem that comes off of the cactus like that sort of thing, and the flower attaches to it like that? I don't know exactly how that works, but that's what it looks like. So I didn't deal with that because I see this right here, and that's really kind of what that looks like right there. Is that there's some kind of a stem that comes off, and then it attaches to the cactus. The things that stood out to me is I got a bit confused about the light source in here. So the flowers are just so beautiful. I love the colors, like the yellows to the salmon colors here to the bright highlights. And then you did a wonderful job with the shadow areas in here. So on the flowers themselves, I feel like you really overall had a good sense of the light source because the light seems to be coming on the same areas on these flowers here. This one may be a little bit different from the rest because you have a lot of what feels like shadow area on these right here, but you still have some light hitting on here. So maybe it was just, there's some petals that are casting shadow onto these. So that is plausible right there. But when it comes to like, it looks like the light source is coming this direction, but then, and then we have, you know, all this shadow here, which makes sense that this flower right here is casting shadow onto this area of the cactus over here. But then we also have like this flower right here. If this flower over here is casting shadow down onto here, I would almost think that this flower would do the same thing almost to here, unless of course it's just not close enough to do it. But there's a shadow over here, and so the shadow over here, I don't know if it's coming from this flower or if the light source is suddenly coming this direction and this flower is casting the shadow back over to here. So that's where I got a little bit confused on the some of that. And when I look at like the cactus themselves, I see like, let's see, where are some of the areas where I got, okay, so like this right here, when we see blue on there, it makes me think of that ambient light coming in and getting light onto there. But then we have, so I guess with some of it, I'm just not quite sure exactly what's happening. What if it's, so like so like we have this right here. It feels like one of those ridges that comes out on the cactus. It's like a cactus is really like a lot of mountains and valleys, right? We've got the ridge out here. It goes down in and creates a valley. And I can see that right here. There's a valley, and then the ridge comes up. But then if the light source is coming this direction, I almost feel like this part would be possibly in shadow. I guess it doesn't have to be, because maybe they're both kind of facing the light to a great extent. But I feel like this side right here would be a little bit darker value, because it wouldn't be getting quite so much light as this one right here. And then this would be very much brighter in, or more saturated in color and brighter in value, because it is more directly facing the light source. So those are some of the things I was thinking about as I went through here. Just trying to really bring clarity to that. The other thing is this right, like this right down here, just a very hard edge on the bottom of that cactus. And when really that's going into shadow, you've got that bright, like a bright highlight on the bottom of that. So I got rid of some of that. And then it was just little touches that I thought might bring some clarity to things or spruce it up a little bit. So here's what I did. Oh, the other thing I thought about was this right here, this long shape that goes all the way through the middle right here. I know that can work as a design, kind of like a, there are certain artists that do that sort of thing, where it's really just for a dramatic design kind of shape in there. But to me, it almost felt like it was distracting from the flowers rather than adding to them. So it's possible to do things like that, but I wondered if just like transitioning more down into here, and not a constant transition, like the same value of dark from on that side as it is on this side, but more of a transitional, so that it's still ambiguous what's going on in the background. It might be like a hill back there, it might be anything when it comes to, it could be any type of scenario. It could be a city scene or a country scene, or out in the desert scene, whatever. Right up next to a house or a fence or something like that. But it gives it kind of variety. It still gives you that backdrop for the flowers, the darker backdrop, which I think works really well. But it's less distractive, I think, this way. So it's just a possibility, Linda. The other thing was this stem that you had on the flower right here. It was so bright from oops, that's not what I meant to do. From here all the way down to the cactus, that it looked a little bit, I wasn't really sure what it was doing. It was the same color as the flower, so I couldn't tell if it was a petal on the flower, if it was a stem attaching the flower to the cactus. I really didn't know what it was, so basically I just diminished it a lot. The other things were I softened the edge on the bottom of the cactus down here. I did bring in where you had highlights on the cactus, like these purple ones right here, like this, all these little, the little needles on the cactus right there, instead of purple. And I know that they're in the shadow. I decided to bring in so that it felt like, the light source coming down this direction right here, casting the shadow down that way. Still warming up those little spots. They just feel more natural when they're a little bit warmer in color temperature, but not as bright as something like, maybe some of these over here. And I did that throughout, like over here, adding a little bit. And then I softened out some of the areas where you had really strong dark and light, like right here. where that's a really strong edge right there, I just soften that with softer shadows. See, so it's still not dark up here. See, I mean, it's still not light. It's not like it's coming, the light is shining right on it, but there's just a little bit more transitional tones in there going around. And then where it's really right next to the ridge of that, where it's very much being blocked, the light is being blocked, it's much darker right there. So I did some transitions like that, brought in a little bit more light on an edge in places, like up on the top of this cactus here. Made this more warm here, and then where it's on the back here, where it might be getting a little bit of ambient light coming in there, more of the bluish green. Now that might just be the coloration of a cactus too, so that might be part of the reason why that was there. So you can just ignore it if that's the case. But those are really the main changes that I made in there, Linda. So the flowers, though, very beautiful, really fun to look at. So great job, and thank you very much. Okay, next is Marion, right? Yeah. This is just a fantastic painting, Marion. I love all the colors in here, the different flowers. It's just so fun to look at. It just has a lot of energy to it, and I love it. It's really fun. So, the things that really stood out to me. Number one, I didn't do anything with the background. There's nothing that stands out that I just think, oh, that's just terrible. That needs to be changed. I think it's working with the flowers. It's not distracting too much from the flowers. So, possibly, something like this over here, which is really strong, might take away a little bit from your orange flowers right there, but overall it's not. You have these green transitional colors here, so that helps, and I think that's probably enough to not even worry about that. The thing that I did notice, though, the thing that was really strong was, this is the main thing right here. The lip of that vase or that pitcher is a bit awkward. It has a strong shadow underneath it, and just the drawing of it, softening that out might help that to take some emphasis off of it, because it's so strong, it actually detracts from the flowers a bit. Once the viewer notices it, it's like it keeps on bringing us down to that area of the painting. The pot, it's the picture itself, this edge, I did not do anything with that, but that would be something to think about, Marion, is that it does flatten it. Because that's just dark all the way, and the edge is so hard right there, it actually it flattens that image right there. You've got this wonderful highlight right here, and you've got this texture that goes around, but then it's as if it just stops, and you have this solid color of dark right there without any real transitional tones. And then the bright of the background, this bright edge of the background back there, that's just flattening it, and it's making it feel like it's rounding, and then boom, it stops, and suddenly it's like maybe it's a completely flat. It's not round all the way. It's round on the front, and then the back of it is a flat area, kind of like something that you could set on a table or something like that. So you might want to do some transitional, just making it go all the way. And one way to do that is to take these tones that you have in here, those wonderful colors that are going around like that with that texture, take it all the way around, and then afterwards come in with a glaze. Oh, my throat's stuck. With a glaze where you take like a dark glaze, and you have it a little bit darker towards the very farthest edge, but it transitions, like it's darker here, and then it gets less dark as you come towards the highlight area. You see how that works? So it's more of a transitional curve to it, rather than suddenly a cutoff between light and dark. And that will help with that, with helping it to feel more three-dimensional, and like it's actually going around. Okay, The other things that stood out, these leaves right here, it might be that they just have a bright yellow on the tips of them, and so that might work right there, but it almost felt like there was just this bright highlight that you didn't intend to be there, that's taking away from those a little bit. And then I played with a little bit more light and dark. You have wonderful contrast in here, really bright flowers and some dark areas like in here. You know, you have these recessed areas where you go back in there and you have these really dark areas. But you have little in between. Like you have the flowers and they're mostly bright, especially with saturated color, really rich color. And then you have really dark where there's nothing else happening. So what do I mean by that? So let's say like this stem of this flower right there, where it's coming behind. If I think about where is the light source, and it really looks a lot like your light source is coming straight from the viewer, like it's behind the viewer coming straight and hitting the flowers full on right like this. And that might be the case. And in that case, it is going to be, you're going to have a lot less light and dark to work with. But I did notice that you have bright on the top of like this flower right here, right up on this flower. You have brighter on the top, and then you have this that looks like it's in the shadow down below. So if that is the case on that flower, it means that our light source is coming from the top. And then you also have these shadows down underneath these flowers down here, which also gives me a little bit of a hint that maybe the light source is not just coming straight at it from the front, but maybe it's coming from up top, but it's also coming down, it's higher up than what some of the other flowers look like. So if it is a little bit higher up, then that gives even more opportunity for some light and shadow transitions. Not a lot of them, because I think too many of them will take away from the feeling that you have already in the painting, Marion, but maybe just a few. And one of the other things that I felt kind of distracted from the rest is this right here, this dark spot right there. You have all those stems in there, like this one right here, this right here, and this, that in contrast with that dark shape right there, it kind of takes away from the flowers a bit. So I decided to do this. So I broke that up a little bit more, softened out some of the, softened some of the stems that were in there, brought in like this leaf right here, brought this leaf over the edge of this lip right there, just so that there wasn't so much attention in that one spot right there. And then really played with that idea of the light source being a little bit higher up. So like the flowers in here, and I brought some flowers, some of these blue flowers. I love these. These are so fun. I brought some of those back into that area a little bit more. That also creates that feeling of things all integrated with one another. So rather than having these blue flowers just out in this area right here, I'm moving them back in there so that this stem is now coming over the top of a grouping of those flowers that moves back into the base. And it just helps to give more of a gentler transition between them. And I don't know what those texts are. I was making sure it wasn't from Christy, which it shouldn't be, because it probably wouldn't be, because she would just do it over the intercom. And I did the same thing. You had a little bit of shadow like over here in this spot right there, but I increased that a bit. I took this stem right here and left part of it out in the light right here, and part of it moving down into the shadows back behind that flower. Just little areas like that. This petal of the flower right there, moving into the shadows. So just small spots like that all throughout the painting, so that it gives it more of that feeling of increased light and shadow. And you could do that just picking out areas throughout. You could do that just in spots. I wouldn't do that too much, but like, and I didn't do it everywhere. I just wanted to give you some examples of that. But like right here, right in this spot right here, you could do the same thing. You could have like this stem more out in the light, and this one pushed back even more into the shadows, as if it's underneath this petal of the flower. So if you just pick out some small spots like that, Marianne, you can really create a little bit more contrast and three-dimensional quality to everything in it. But as far as the colors, like this right here, the edges that you have on your flowers, the flowers themselves, like just the way you shaped that flower right there, that orange, the reddish orange with the yellow fringe around it, it's just a beautiful shape and just really exciting to look at. So much fun to look at. That it's just excellent, excellently done. And all the varieties of flowers and things that you have in here, it's really a fun piece. So I don't want you to lose that, but at the same time, if you think in terms, like if you see this one right here, I really pushed that idea of what you did up in here, and glazed, put a little bit more glaze on it to create even more of that feeling of light and shadow on there. And that is it, really, I think. Let's see. I go back and forth. So I did soften. Okay, you did have that same idea of what we were talking about with Linda when it comes to the highlights, using more white as a highlight rather than natural color. I brought in more color to it. Part of the way that we can, one technique for bringing in the feeling of more color to a highlight is to actually darken the things around it, so we don't have to use as much white as we would normally use. So if the only way we can get something bright enough is to add more white, because we've gotten everything else around it is so bright that we're left with no recourse but to just go with pure white, because that's the brightest pigment we have in value. Then what's something else we can do? We can darken everything around it, and then it will feel brighter just by the contrast of all the darker values around it. So rather than adding more and more white, we darken everything around it, and we can use less white, more strong, more saturated color in it, and it will still feel very bright. And that's really what I was doing with these blue flowers down here, was giving you a lot of strong color in them and getting rid of some of that white, the white highlight that was used in there. So those are some of the recommendations that I have, some ideas that are possibilities that you can use in there, Marianne. Okay, beautiful piece. Thank you very much. Okay, aspens. And of course, I love aspen trees. So we lived in the mountains of Colorado for 12 years, Christy and I, and we were surrounded where we lived. It was near the San Isabel Forest, and there are aspens everywhere up there. So that was one of my favorite painting subjects, and they still are to this day. That's why I'm working on this big 30 by 40, which is almost finished. It should have been done before now, but it is very close. I just have a few touch-ups to do, and I'll be done. And boy, I'm just getting texts like crazy today. I think our family often has some kind of a texting thread going on, and I think that's what's happening. And I don't know how to turn this off on here. So hopefully it's not too distracting for you. Okay, so this looks like you've been utilizing one of the videos in the library, and you've done a great job with it. And you know what? I cannot see your name on here. Let's see what that is. Now, I don't know how to pronounce your name. It looks like either Nita or Nieta or something like that. I'll just go with Nita. How about that? So hopefully I'm not butchering your name, and I apologize if I am. So Nita, the colors that you have in here, you did a fantastic job with them. And you have paint texture and movement. You're really going for it. And that is just fantastic. You're going to progress so fast because you're really you're overcoming a lot of what happens with people with timidity in painting. And I just love what you've done in here. the combinations of the warm and cool colors that you have over here with the lavenders and the yellows, the pink texture that you have throughout the painting. Like this down here, look at that paint texture. That's just fantastic. So excellent job with it. You've got great contrast with the like the things that you're putting the knots in the aspen trees. So really well done. A lot of courageous painting going on in here. So some of the things that might help make it stronger. Something I noticed was, one of the things first off that I noticed was this right here. You've got this area of dark, and I know that that is a dramatic technique in painting. Someone like Calvin Liang, he uses it a lot. He was a painter for Disney, and in his professional work, he still utilizes that idea of going from a darker foreground right here to lighter. It's a transitional effect to move the viewer into the painting, and it creates more drama. It's kind of that idea that we talked about where if you want to make something feel brighter, you darken the things around it. That's part of how we do that. So I can see you're going for that effect right there, but it's such a strong shape that really has very little that transitions between that and the rest of the foreground, especially right here. It just cuts off, and then we have a very strong line. So it doesn't feel like it actually belongs in the painting right there, Nita, or Nita. The other thing is we've got this curve right here that feels like it's almost like a curve right here, and I don't know what that curve is doing. It's almost like it's creating a bowl kind of feeling right there. So I love the texture and the movement. It's just that everything is moving the same right there, and it's just creating that effect of a bowl, like concave effect right there. So I worked on that, and then this right here, Anita, it kind of goes like that, and then you have purple on this side of it. There's just like this purple outline on both sides of that aspen tree, and I'm not sure why we have that. See, you have green right here, you have green right here, and then you have purple, and you have purple, and then you have the aspen tree. It's like just these strips of color right there, rather than like a bush that's behind the aspen tree that goes all the way across, and then you have another bush or a rock or something, some kind of things that are going all the way across like this. It's like there's strips and we don't know what those strips are and why they do that. And you have a little bit of that same thing going on right over here with this aspen tree as well. So I did get rid of some of that. I love that you're bringing the red of this tree out away. So see, this is one of those where this red tree is actually coming behind the aspen tree and moving on over. That's the kind of technique that we're talking about, the effect that we're talking about, is getting that where it feels like whatever it is back there is moving all the way back behind it. So this is what I did. Oh, also the sky, it is so bright and lacking in color that it's really close to, since your aspen trees are mostly white, almost entirely white, the color in the sky is also, it has a little tinge of blue to it, but it's almost entirely white. And because of that, the only reason the aspen trees stand out is because it feels like there's a little bit more warmth in the aspen trees than there is in the sky. And so just a tiny bit of value helps them to stand out, but they're still getting lost. So instead of having them get lost, I darkened up the sky. And then one other thing needed to pay attention to, you've got this foliage over here that's coming over the front of this aspen tree. So that makes me wonder, where's that foliage coming from? Because if it's coming from this tree back here, this tree is quite a ways, you see that? From this tree. This aspen tree is coming out here, which means that it's like me standing out here and the other tree is way up here. And yet the foliage from the tree that's back behind is actually coming over the front of that aspen tree, which that kind of, what that's doing to the viewers, it's confusing them as to the placement of those things. It almost feels like that purple red tree should be on the same plane as the aspen tree or in front of it rather than behind it. So I took that aspen tree and just brought it out in front of that foliage right there. Okay, so here are the changes that I made. I tried to tie areas together, like the purple down in the bottom here, pulling that out a little bit farther so it's not cut off right in the middle of the painting right there, and so it's not a dramatic cutoff between the two. I brought in some greens, darker in value, so that they're still dark valued, but I brought some greens down into the purple down here, some greens down like that, and then brought in some purples up into here, just some transitional colors. I tried to tie a lot of the shapes of color that you had in here, tie some of those together a little bit more, breaking up like this right here so that it doesn't just feel like a bowl, but bringing some colors across, more straight across like this, colors going across all of them so that it's not just dramatic shapes that are doing this sort of thing. To break that up a little bit so it's not such a bold shape. You can see the aspen tree up here coming on top of that foliage back there, bringing in more of the darker blues in the sky so that the aspen trees themselves stand out more. I did bring in a little bit more of that red, not as dramatic and strong as what you had here already, but a little bit over even farther so that it just feels, it takes it away from that tree and it's that expansive feeling that we were talking about. It just pulls it across more. And broke up the layers that you had along the tree right there, those outlining colors of horizontal layers. And let's see, so if we go back and forth, you can see really a lot of it was just breaking up lines like this right here. So this is one of those lines I was trying to break up. You see this thing right here? It's like a shape. It's a light shape that goes over and back, and I don't know exactly what it's doing. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but it almost, because of the value of it and the shape of it, it almost kind of flattens that out and pulls that up this way. And I was trying to push it so it's going back into the distance. And then really a lot of it was just tying some of the areas together a little bit more. But for the most part, the stuff I did back here was just to break up these lines that you have in here. Let's see, anything else there? Oh, yeah, I did. On this one right here, you have this aspen branch right there that just kind of dies off. But it almost looks as if the foliage from this bush back there is cutting it off. So instead of having that bush feel like it's cutting it off, I did bring in I pulled that branch out a little bit more. So it's still not strong. And I want to make sure that it feels like it's going back behind this aspen tree right here. But it was just so that it had kind of that feeling of going in front of the bush, but behind this little aspen tree that's in front of it. Okay. And I think those are the main things that I focused on in there. I just now noticed this, Nita. This branch right here that ends right there, it almost feels like it's coming from this aspen tree that's back in the distance, but it's really strong, and it almost feels like it's just kind of floating out here where it ends at that point. So I would think about that a bit as far as what is going on with that. And maybe, because you already have this one coming across, maybe just softening this out entirely or greatly so that it does go to the tree back here, but it's very small and insignificant, so we barely notice it. kind of like what I did with the branches here, where they're very small and thin, and kind of a broken brush texture to them, so that we hardly notice that they're there. And one way to do that would be to take like the sky color that's in there and just kind of pull it across this a little bit in a scumbling fashion here and there to break that up and to lessen the strength of it. And I think that's it. So hopefully that's helpful. You notice here with this shape that I talked about earlier right there, I didn't get rid of it entirely, but I brought this across so it feels like it's moving in and it's going back into other shapes that are back in the distance more. And that just helps to round that down and move it this way rather than flattening it, bringing it up this way. Okay, so that's it. That was all for that one. Beautiful piece though, really well done. Wonderful, strong color. I love it. Great job, Nita. Okay, Rick. And Rick also sent me, oh yeah, he did send me, I used the other picture. Rick, you got it to me before I had actually finished, had done the critiquing on your piece. So here is the updated picture from Rick. Okay, so Rick, Rick has been with us a long time, and I've been a huge fan of his work. He has a very unique approach to his works, more stylized, but very fun. He has just a kind of an intuitive feeling for shapes and motion. Okay, so let's see. Rick, what stood out to me? I love the flowers. I love this blue on these flowers right here. I think that blue just makes those flowers sing. Without it, it just would lose everything. So I love that. And turn this off. I guess my son David doesn't realize I'm doing a webinar right now. He should, but I would forget if I wasn't the one doing it myself. Okay, so what stood out to me? I love all the texture, all the movement that you have in here, Rick, all the little touches of flowers all in here, the texture back on the mountain back here. I love the sky. I think it's just fantastic, all that paint texture and movement that you have in the sky. So I didn't want to detract or take away from any of that. What I did notice was, like the mountains, it's basically the same treatment from left to right, which you can get away with that because the painting is overall stylized. So the thing but I did bring in some variety just to see, just to show you some possibilities with it. Not to say to do that, but just to show you if that was done, this is what it would be like. The other thing I noticed here is this, Rick. It's like, almost like, and then you have this little thing right there. So it's almost like an owl or a cat or something where it's got the little pointed ears on there because of the bowl shape right here. And because these two shapes right here are basically the same. So I played with that. And then the green here in the foliage, in the leaf structure all through there in the field, it's the same all the way from top to bottom. So I played with that as well, bringing in some lavenders and blues back in here to help push that field so that it's not just one big flat shape right there, make it feel like it's going into the distance. And you did that a bit, Rick, with the how you broke up the actual flowers themselves, just putting in little remnants of it rather than really bringing in big shapes like this. But the color is what's throwing it off right there as far as creating distance in it. Okay. And then I also noticed this hill right here, you do have some softening to that edge, but overall it's a pretty strong, hard edge all the way across it. And I don't know if that bothers me or not. I'm on the fence about that one, Rick. So so here's what I did. I did bring in some blues, and probably too much. After a day or two of not seeing it and coming back to it, it gives me a fresh perspective again. And so I don't know that I would necessarily use as much blue as what I used in there, because that's almost too much. but I think more the lavender, like what I have in the very back here. I use more lavender back there, the reddish lavender rather than a bluish lavender. I think that might be more appropriate to it. It would actually harmonize better with the yellow of the flowers. So, but that kind of an idea where it's just bringing in, what I was doing was just taking your sky color and bringing that down on there so that it has that ambient atmospheric effect to it. But I think the blue, I just have too much strong blue all the way down this way. So ignore that part, Rick, and think more in terms of, I think, especially some of these lavenders might be even better. And I think the blues that I had closer to the viewer right here are just too bright, too strong. So I wouldn't go that far with it. Hopefully that gives you the idea of just, how to kind of push that, add a little bit more atmosphere into it so it can move it into the distance. And then I did soften one edge on the hill right here, just a little bit so that it helps move us into these hills back here, but that's not a big deal, not really necessary. I took one of the mountains back here and this one back here and changed them, added more lavender into those to kind of, just to give you the option of having some mountains back behind, some coming forward. It's just more layers is all it is. And lessened the cat ears here a little bit. There's still some of that, the cat ear thing going on, but not quite, they're not identical really anymore. And I did bring in, let's see, I did a couple of things to the flowers. What did I do there? I added a flower down on the bottom, down here. One right there on the side, like what we talked about earlier, creating more of that expansive feeling where they go off the edges of the painting. And I did bring in one more like this because all of these yellow flowers were confined to just this straight across right here. So I just took one of the ones you had back there that was more of the orange yellow and added a little bit more of the lemon yellow to it, or more greenish yellow to it, and add a little bit in there just to see what that would do to kind of create, so it's not just a stark, here are these brighter yellow, and then they suddenly change all of a sudden right here. That idea. Okay. And that is it. I think those are the only real changes in there. Anything else as I go back and forth? Nope, that's really it. So I didn't want to go and change. I mean, you've seen what we've done with some of the other critiques. So, if you think about like wanting to have a light source, maybe have an area like this right here that's in shadow because it's behind this mountain right here. There's things like that you could do. Like maybe this is coming forward and you have a little bit of a shadowed area right here because that's now in shadow if the light's coming from the right and sweeping across, that sort of thing. But it's not a big deal because it's the painting overall is more of a flat layering effect anyway, which is just, it doesn't take away from the painting. So what I'm looking at when I see some certain paintings is what's the intent of it? What are they trying to achieve? And to me, it wasn't really going for a three-dimensional effect because then you'd have to change the idea of the whole painting if you did that. But it's more of a color and texture and movement is what I see the painting as. So that's why I left it like that, Rick. And to me, the one thing that I would think about is the sky. To me, the sky is almost the center of interest in the painting because it has so much movement, so much going on in it and it's so fun to look at that I really have a hard time deciding whether I want to look at the flowers or at the sky. So they're almost on an even par with each other as far as interest goes, Rick. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We often want to get to where, one area, we might have several different centers of interest within a painting, but we usually try to have like one area where it's the main center of interest, and then a lot of other centers of interest throughout the painting. In this case, having two centers of interest isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the mountain also back there, with the kind of texture that you have in it that's different than the other shapes in the painting, that also demands a lot of attention. So you have several elements in here that are very demanding of the viewer, but that kind of works because it's happening throughout the painting. So I wouldn't change that. I think it just works. It makes me think of what we talked about on Wednesday with some of David Hockney's new landscape paintings. Looking at those, he has a whole lot that's going on in his paintings, and it still works. So I think that's what's happening here, Rick. I think the painting overall is working really well. So maybe adding some, the reason why I suggest atmosphere in this area right here is just because I do feel like you're wanting the viewer to feel like that's a field that's going into the distance. And so without getting too detailed or changing the character of the painting overall, just getting some, like, especially if you take like some of the kind of texture that you have back here, not the same value, but the same kind of texture that you have in there, and doing that with some lavenders a little bit in here, mixed in with these greens, that will help it to feel like it's still the same flavor of the painting, but it's creating some of that depth that you might want to have in there. All right, that's it. Thank you, Rick. That was very nice, very beautiful. All right, Sharita, I feel like I for some reason when I saw this, I thought I had critiqued this painting before, but I couldn't find it in any of the critiques, so I must not have. I looked through our old critiques to see if you had done some changes based on that, but couldn't find anything, so I don't know why that's in my head. But this is very familiar. Maybe we talked about it in like one of our Wednesday lunchtime things or something. I can't remember. So, but anyway, I love the painting. As far as it makes me want to be there. I've been in some places like this in the West, and I just love that whole feeling. It's really like winter time. All the leaves have fallen off of the cottonwood trees, and you've got all that. What are those bushes? We see them a lot in Idaho too, where I went to school. They had a lot of these, lots of twigs coming out of them, very red, purplish red twigs everywhere. And in the spring and summer, they get leaves on them, but otherwise they're just kind of a bunch of twigs. But they're so condensed. There's so many of them that they're really looks more bushy. So that's kind of what that all reminds me of. And I love the design in here, Sharita. So, and your hills in the background too. Just the way you've created the feeling in those hills, the softness of them like this. I love that. I think it's just fun to look at. So, some of the things that stood out to me, Sharita, are the bushes. You have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See that? It's kind of a pattern all through there. They're both about the same size, same shape, and they all come in twos. So I did break that up. And then this foreground right here, it's very close to the viewer, and yet it's completely bleached out. And as colors and spaces get closer to the viewer, the stronger the colors and values are going to be. So the lights are going to be lighter, the darks are going to be darker, the colors are going to be more saturated. Generally speaking, the closer it gets to the viewer. You have more detail in there, but you've really bleached out the color in that foreground area. And I can understand that because you don't want to draw too much attention necessarily to that corner. So I can see that. But there are ways to still have that saturation of color and value without drawing too much attention away from the rest of the painting. And so I'll show you what I did with that. The other is this bush right here is a very strong rectangular shape. It has some curvature to the edges, but it's really a strong rectangle right there. And it's a powerful shape that demands a lot of attention. So I broke that up and tried to get it so that it feels more like transitional areas where we can move through that bush into the rest of the painting. Then let's see, this back here is very strong as well. Just as a shape, it's the strongest value in the painting, and it's a really condensed shape rather than like filtering back in and losing itself in the rest of the painting. It's just suddenly dominant and it's right there. So I changed that quite a bit, Trita, to break that up. I also brought in, just so that we have a bit more separation, this line of foliage right here, right at the top right there. It's it's like a very strong shape all by itself. Just that line of foliage at the top, and it almost is kind of a distractive transition between the branchy trees and the soft hills back behind. So I tried to bring in a little bit more color and transition in there so that it separates the trees from the hills even more, and it breaks up that shape. Because if you notice, there's kind of like a dark, even a small dark outline along the top ridge of that color, and the color itself is very close to the colors in the hills back here. I did add a little bit of lavender scumbling over the hills in the background, or glazing as well. And I like a shape like this right here, Shrita. It's so strong, so dark in value, and so strong in shape, and cuts off that aspen tree that comes down onto it. I broke that up as well. So look for, it's little things like that. Bringing in a little bit more color into some of these areas. I know that in the wintertime, a lot of that just gets bleached out and there's hardly any color to it. But I did, as things got closer to us, I brought in more color. As they go farther away, it's less saturated. So here's what I did. So I took the color really that you had in here, oops, can't see that, into the top edge of that, and I brought it down in more so that it doesn't feel like such a stark separation between this area of leaves up on the very top of the trees and nothing down below. I tried to transition that down so it's a little more gentle transition through it. And then you can see it's more of the lavenders that I brought into the hills back behind, so that those push even farther away. And that lavender now, when you bring in some of these warmer tones in the leaves, you see I still have some of those grays and things like that into it, but some of these warmer colors in here, not too warm, they're not strong, they're still fairly light in value and not real strongly saturated as a color, but enough that it gives you a real definite separation between the hills and the trees here. With this bush down here, I broke up the overall shape of it so that it has more movement like that, and gave you light and shadow changes throughout it, like brighter areas here that transition into shadow areas, so that it's not such a strong shape right there. It feels more like the bushes that you have in the rest of the painting, and it allows the viewer to move through them a little bit more easily to the background. Now this green that's up in here, that's probably a little bit too strong, Shrita, so I would watch that and maybe not have it quite so much. In fact, it needs to be more of the oranges, I think, in there than those greens. I was just trying to bring more saturation of color into it, but I think I got a little bit too much. So I would not, I would disregard that, Shrita, now that I look at it here, because it doesn't feel like it's cohesive with the color that we have in here. I did increase the saturation of color into some of these areas back here and over in this area over here. Broke up a couple of the bushes, like with this one, I made this one come forward. See that it's right here, and then this one I pushed back so that it's back behind that one, and gave it a different color, a different shape than the one in front of it. I pushed this one back over here. They're still basically the same shape as far as that goes, but this way one is back farther and one is more forward towards the viewer. Broke up this shape a little bit. This one I broke up and made it just one bush right there and changed that quite a bit so that we could see more of this water. All that, I love the beautiful blue in there, and I think that adds a lot to the painting itself. So I brought more of that, reduced the size of this one so you could have more of that river flowing back behind. And then the shape of that brown right here, see the water, it's the same kind of thing. And I know that you're doing that because of these right here that are reflecting down into the water, but just softening that shape, that area as a shape, helps that a lot for the water to transition and move us back that way. Rather than a real strong cutoff right there, it's more of a gentle transition, and it doesn't distract nearly as much as the strong separation of those shapes did. And then I really broke up the shape right here, Shrita, so that you have, it feels more cohesive with the trees that are on this side of the painting right there. And that is it, I think. I did bring the water around like that, and then some of it over here. That's not really a necessity or anything. I was just playing with it, experimenting to see what that would do to help move the viewer back through there. But it almost becomes, because of the purple on the top and the purple on the bottom, it almost becomes a distraction back there. I didn't work with it enough to make it feel natural. I'd probably bring more of this yellow into there and move it back in, things like that. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. That was just me playing with things a bit. But otherwise, those are the main things. So you can see I did bring in quite a bit of color into this area right here, a little bit into here, really playing with not strong light and shadow, because overall it's not a high contrasting kind of situation, but definitely strong in some areas, stronger, lighter value compared to the darker value on the bank as it rounds away from the light, that sort of thing. More subtle though than obvious. And that would be it. You can see here, like the blue in the water here, bringing in some of that blue, very dark, not so that it's like spotlights coming through or anything like that, but just little remnants of the watercolor coming in through these bushes to help break up those bushes a little bit. So those are some of the things that I focus on. And I brought in, even with some of the stalks of grass in here, I brought in more color into it rather than the white that was in there. I brought in more actual color into it. So that's it. But overall, it's really a very nice painting. It's really a beautiful piece. I'll show you that. Okay, next is Stephanie. And let me make sure that I'm doing all right time-wise. Okay, so we're doing all right. We'll get through these. And there's actually a 4-hour time limit with these Facebook Live posts. And we have, in the past, gone over 4 hours with some of the critiques. And that's part of the reason why we had to limit it to 15. Because, for one, it was taking me more than a week to do the critiques every month, and I couldn't do that. It was killing me. I couldn't get anything else done with the membership like we're trying to do. And even now, it still takes me at least 3 days to do all the critiques. So it takes a long time to do these. But at the same time, a webinar that goes more than 4 hours, that's just crazy. That's going to wear everybody out, including me and my voice. Okay, so this one, Stephanie, this is just so pretty. These peonies right here are just amazing. Really beautifully done. I love them. They're excellent. And this down here, this one, I love the flower itself. It has a wonderful shape to it, and beautiful clarity to the petals and all of that. I'm just a little bit. It's much harder edged than the other flowers that you have in here. And part of the reason for that is because of the dark and light contrast. The other part is that to a great degree, some of the edges that you have on the flower, like up in here, they're just softer. You have better transition, softer edges, lost and hard edges in there. But in saying that, that is part of what I focused on in here is if you notice right here, you have almost a perfect dark highlight around this whole flower. See that? It is just dark all the way around it. So I try to, when we talk about things continuing on, that's one of the things that we want to focus on. Yes, when we have a light source coming down, we are going to have shadows that are cast down onto other things, but it doesn't have to be so strong. Like one of the reasons why these flowers up here are two of the ones in here that feel the most natural is because the contrasts are much softer. They're not nearly so strong, and that's helping with that naturalism that's in there. The contrast between this and this right here is so harsh that that is taking away. It's actually making it feel more hard-edged and less natural. So those are some of the things that I focused on. I also noticed this. It almost feels a little bit, Stephanie, like a Star Wars spaceship right there. See that? We've got the area right there, and then we have the fins that come off of it for traveling through space. So it almost feels like an aircraft or a spacecraft or something like that, because you have a really strong line here, a strong line over here, a line right there, and a line right there. So I broke those up, got rid of some of them, and just got rid of that whole shape like that, because it's pretty distracted. It's taking away from the flowers themselves. And then the other thing I did in here was this gate back here. I like that the way that you did the gate is really well done, but it still almost takes away. It's like everything is leading us this direction, and then we get to that closed gate back there. So having something back there that really is not anything is going to help to put more of the emphasis back on the flowers again. So we can still move back in there, but there's nothing back there that's going to say, hey, I want you to look at me, because we really want to be looking at the flowers. One last thing, Stephanie, is this. The fence post part right here, because these two shapes right here, this one, the shadow shape and the light shape, are both the same size, it's actually making that feel like that slat, the fence slat, or fence post, I guess, is turned, instead of being flat with the slats of the fence, it feels like it's suddenly kilted this way and it's sideways. So I changed that, and this is what I did. So I changed it to a flat where we just have the small edge right here, very soft edges on that, so that it's not distractive. See, like here, the edges on the outside, edges on the inside, they're very soft edges, not sharp. And just made this so that it's, see down here, this one feels like it's going more into the shadows. You've got the direct cast shadow that's coming from this slat right there, and that helps to give you the depth on that. But at the same time, it's not dark like that all the way down the slat. Or all the way down the post. And then this up here is a little bit brighter than the color that's down here, because we don't want this to really be that obvious. We want it to really kind of dissolve away. We don't want to hardly notice it at all. But at the same time, we want to know that that's a fence post right there that's holding up these slats. So that's what I turned that into. And also, the viewer almost feels like the viewer is on a level right here, where we can see the top of this slat, but we would also probably be able to see the bottom of that slat. So I just added in the shadow on the bottom of this right there. And then in the background, I cooled down the color temperature on this side of it, and pulled that really across the whole thing. You still have this feeling of light and shadow back there where you've got the light on these back here on the grass, on the lawn that's moving back in the distance, but it's really all soft and ambiguous and just as kind of a backdrop. It's like having a wall in a still life, so that all the emphasis now is on the flowers. This guy right here, I left this leaf. I think that one's just fantastic right there. As far as the stem coming off of it, it all works really well. But I really diminished this right here and got rid of completely that one right there, so that now we don't have that spaceship effect on it. Another thing, let's see, I softened, like the way that I softened the dark going all the way around the flower, because these work so well right here, is by giving some transitional shadow tones going on that leaf. As it goes back in, it's still getting, it might have a cast shadow on it, but it's not all the way under there. When we get all the way under, we might be blocking out the light entirely, but there's going to be still some ambient light coming in there, some reflected light coming through the petals of the flower, for one, and reflecting off the area where it's shining onto the leaf. That reflected light from the leaf, the light coming through the translucence of that flower petal is going to make it so that it still gets a little bit of light in there, so it's not nearly as dark of a shadow on this area of the leaf as it is much farther in and where all of the light is being blocked. And that subtle transition like that helps to soften that contrast between the flower petal and the leaf. And then we don't just have this really dark edge all the way around that flower. Those are some of the things that you can do to help to soften that soften out that contrast and make it feel more natural. I did the same thing with something like this, bringing that leaf color all the way through there, because we don't necessarily have the light being blocked everywhere all the way around the flower, because the light source is going to be coming in one direction or another. So, sorry about that. So whatever direction the light source is coming from, we have more on that side. And I was doing the light source kind of coming like this more. So the stronger shadows are going to be on this side and the less shadows over on this side. And yes, we have this leaf coming across. It's probably going to cast some shadow down here, but it gives us leeway to have more light behind the flowers over here and less light behind the flowers over here, sort of thing. And let's see. So some of the other little things, I did the same thing down here with this flower, softer transitions with some of these areas, just so that it's not quite such strong contrast everywhere. With some of your purple flowers, I did this leaf right here was so strong, Stephanie, and it's almost like a shape that's kind of floating there, rather than feeling like it's attached to anything. It's almost like it's just floating. Oh, and I just now noticed that you have really kind of like this, 1, 2, 3, that move you that direction. So breaking that up a bit will be very helpful. So I didn't do that to these 3, but I did break it up with this one right here. I just kind of pushed that back behind. I brought in more of the purple flower and pushed that leaf behind, because for one, you had one up here and one down here that were very bright and very vertical or horizontal in nature, and so it became kind of like railroad tracks and a little bit distractive right there. So anything you can do to break up that kind of distraction. And I would almost be inclined to soften out one of these somewhere, like maybe this one, a little bit like putting a darker glaze over it, and maybe like take and leave this as the light area of that leaf, but maybe then this starts to curve away from the light and you darken that with shadow right there, something like that. I would play with glazing over some of those areas, Stephanie, and that might be helpful right there. So those are really the main things that I focused on in here. I did bring in just a little bit of light onto that bud right there, just to pull it out away from the back here, but not a lot. I don't think you want that to be a focus area or anything, but just to give it some kind of like what you did to right here on this one. So otherwise, it's really well done. It's a beautiful painting. You have a wonderful mix of the warm and cool greens, and the flowers are beautiful. So it's a very inviting, beautiful painting, Stephanie. So excellent job. Okay, now we have Susie. Okay, so fun. The paint quality in this is fantastic, Susie. It's really well done, and for the most part, it looks like you're probably an artist that sells your paintings regularly. So it has a very professional quality to it. This sky is just fantastic in here. I love the sky, and I did not see anything in that sky that I would think to change. The only thing that in looking at it right now, just like, in that first instance, would possibly be this, but I wouldn't, probably not, is what I would say. It's just a little bit dark, and it's like a cool dark right there, that is darker than anything else in the sky, and it's almost as dark as a lot of the darks that you have down here. So one thing to remember about sky is that overall, the values in the sky are never going to be as dark as the dark values or the shadow values that we have on land. Even when you have these dark, really amazing looking storm clouds, the values, if we go by physics, the values in the storm clouds will not be as dark as what we have on land. Now, I disregarded that a lot throughout my career, because especially early in my career when I was playing with skies a lot, I had really vigorous brushwork in my skies, and I would often have very dark values and strong color up in my skies. So when I say that, yeah, by physics, we're not going to have values that are as dark in the sky as what we have on the land, because there's nothing solid in the sky. And the things on the land are solid, except for maybe like a leaf that is very thin and translucent, or a flower petal or something like that. Something translucent, that's different. But when we're talking about actual substance, clouds don't have substance. They can get enough water molecules in there that it's blocking a lot of light, because what's happening with those water molecules is the light is bouncing through those water molecules and being bounced all over the place. And that's why the light is, a lot of it's being bounced away from us, and that's what's creating those darker shadows. But at the same time, there's still always light coming through. One area or another, the light's going to come through there, compared to like a rock or a blade of grass or a tree on the ground. There's just a very distinct difference between them. At the same time, the thing that really matters in a painting is the painting itself. That is what we want to focus on. So if those darker values in the sky give it more drama and make it more exciting and interesting to look at, then do that. Disregard the laws of physics or science or whatever else, whatever anyone thinks as far as what should be, and go with what is working. So that's always if there's any rule in painting, it is do what is best for your painting. And so that would be the first rule in painting. All right, so I love this though. See, like this one over here, Susie, that value right there, just it's a little bit softer, and just has a much more cohesive feeling with what you have in the rest of the painting than just that little streak right there of I think it's the combination of both the value and the hard edge quality of it that gives me a little bit of pause just in that one spot. So that's something to think about. Maybe just scumbling over with a little bit of this little bit lighter, bluer value, dark value right there might do the trick, but it might not need anything at all. So don't pay too much attention to that, because overall the sky is working fantastic. The way that you come down into these, where the sun's setting a little bit, the lavenders and the salmon colors in there, they are just so beautiful, and the movement in there, the painterly quality of it is just really well done. Okay, I love how you are creating distance with the sheep here that are larger than the sheep as we go into the distance right here, and things like that. So when I see that, it makes me think that yes, you're trying to create that real sense of distance and depth in your painting. The thing that makes me, that kind of disrupts that, is this right here, this long line of very dark trees that are all, when we talked about this in Shritas, where the trees were like 1, 2, and the same size, both of them the same size, and same basic treatment to them, not a real difference in value and light. So your trees you have a light side and you have a dark side, but you do that basically almost all the way through each one of these. You have a light side, a dark side, light side, a dark side, and they're all about the same size. See this? Get the same size all the way, a little bit different in size here and there, but really a lot the same all the way across there. And the value of it is so dark that it creates a wall that prevents the viewer from going back into all this back here. I see all this beautiful quality back in here, but I have a hard time getting back to it because of this really strong fortress of a wall that you have right here, preventing me from getting back there. So this is what I did. It's the same kind of thing right here. I love the grasses in here, but it's almost like very strong across most of it right there. So I broke that up some. And what gave me a cue a little bit here, Susie, was this right here. You have these beautiful, I love this transition from this that's in the light up here, going down into these trees that feel like they're more being, the light's being blocked from it, maybe from a cloud that's coming over or something like that. So that's what I took my cue from. And so I added a little bit more atmosphere to some of the trees back here. And you can play back and forth with that, just as far as what you think works really well. But I was just trying to create something that would allow the viewer to move back into that distance there. I broke up a few of the shapes down into this area as well. Like you have a really bright spot right there, a really bright spot right there, one right there. It's like there are these little touches that are just really distinctly bright in those spots. And then the rest of it around it is really dark without much going on in it. Whereas in some of these other areas, you've got these beautiful transitions all throughout it with brush texture and color and value. So I tried to add a little bit more of that into some of these other areas as well, taking away the really bright, like boom, kind of spotlight things that are in there. Let's see. And then just coming into the foreground here, softening some of the grasses. Like in here, I opened this up a little bit right there. So you have the tall grasses here, and then here. It's just to make it more variety of the repetition of pattern is really what it was about. It's creating a less predictable outcome right there. It's the way that nature does. Nature, it's generally when man gets involved that we have more of a predictable, static design to things. But when we look at nature itself, it just grows in all kinds of random patterns a lot. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I think of like clumps of grass like that. We might have one here growing this way closer to the viewer, one a little bit farther away from the viewer. Then we have like maybe 2 or 3 of them over here, and then one right here, 4 or 5 of them over here, that sort of thing. It's more random rather than a rigid pattern going across that might diminish in size, but it's still basically the same treatment across, trying to break that up, make it less predictable. And I mean, that's really about it in here, Susie. Those are the things that I really focused on. Oh, I did not get rid of that little white or red thing there. Okay, so going back and forth. See, I didn't entirely get rid of like this right here. That's a little bit darker in value than what we have back here. I brought in a little bit more lavender back here. I love this green, that light green that moves us back there, as if the light is shining on that area back there. I was just bringing in some things like more vertical to disrupt some of the horizontal of the trees that were there, stuff like that. And I'd almost like, some of these are still standing out, like these two right here. See that the diagonal of that light that's on those trees, the highlight area of it, they're still kind of all there, and they're still in kind of that pattern. I would probably break that up a bit and make that less predictable as well as a pattern repetition. And I think that was it, because otherwise it has a wonderful feeling in the painting overall. It's really just a beautiful piece. So now, and that's a tough one, because it almost, the contrast that you have in there, right there, does give it a lot of drama. So I wouldn't necessarily get rid of as much as I did. Like maybe have some, let me see if I can take out like an area. Oh, that's probably 100%, isn't it? Come on down, take it down to like a 20%. Maybe like an area where you have some trees that are closer to us right here. And then other areas where it's going back in, that sort of thing. Maybe something like that. And or layers of it, where some are stronger value, but maybe not quite as strong a value as they are right now. Like, let's try this. Get rid of that, and we do, oops, like a 10%, where it still has a little bit of that atmosphere in there, but still more drama or more contrast than what it is right now. Does that make sense? So not necessarily bringing it back fully like the ones over here to the left, but a little bit so that you still have some of that layering of closer, not quite so close, and much farther away. That's that idea. So those are some of the things that are possibilities that you might think about. All right. So great job, Susie. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Okay, Tom. And Tom sent me a reference image, which was very helpful. Thank you, Tom. Anytime that you can send me any image that you're working from, it will speed up my process tremendously, because often I have to look up on the internet for images or something that I can use that will help me to know kind of where you're at. I have to look up light sources, things like that, so I can. It's just helpful if I have the image to go off of. All right, Tom, I love I thought I got myself a water. All right. I love the overall design. I think it's just really fun. The way we move like this. Oh, that's right. I changed that. Let's see, I need the brush. And is it still strong? Yeah, good. I didn't change the brush. So I love this. Just the shape of that river, that little creek right there, Tom, that's fantastic. The shape of this curvy nature to that is just a lot of fun. And then it goes like this, and we move like this, and we just move on back. So a great whimsical design technique that you have in here. That I love that, the way we are moving the viewer through the painting. The things that stood out to me, Tom, I love the painterliness. I like in your grasses over here, all those colors, the blues and yellows and reds and greens, just really fun all through there. I like the heron that's down here. The heron, like when Christy came in to look at it, it took her a while before she even noticed the heron was there. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. And I love these trees. I like the trunks of the trees, the foliage, the pine needles and all that, the leaves, everything in those trees. I think that's a lot of fun. I like these trees, the grouping of trees over here, and how we go even farther back into those trees that are off in the distance. So the things that I wondered about are these. I love the flowers. I like the way that you executed those flowers, the quality of them, but I'm wondering what they're for. Because right now, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them is like it's just a distraction. It's like I can hardly look at anything else because those 4 really red baskets of flowers are demanding a lot of attention. And the bird, even your title says that it's a blue heron, but that's a really reddish purple heron right there. More of like the color of a flamingo or something like that. So I wondered why you did the colors the way you did. So I looked up a blue heron, found a picture because your reference image didn't actually have a heron in it. So I looked at references of blue herons, and I couldn't find one that had that kind of coloration. So I changed the coloration to be more like a blue heron. And then I eliminated one of these baskets and diminished another, made it smaller, so that they're not quite so, I don't want to take them out entirely, but I did diminish them so that they blend into the background more in spots, and they don't demand quite so much attention, and it helps to pull a little bit more attention onto the heron that's in the picture. And then, so here's the things that I did. Also, the shadows right here, Tom, they're flat because they're the same value, and they're kind of a, what is that? The value of this, even though it's dark, it's really not that dark for something that's going to be under a bridge, especially when right here, when it comes right underneath this area of that shadow should be, with how bright the light is out here and out here, that should be really dark right underneath that bridge. And then it should get less dark as it moves away. And you do some of that. You have this softer edge out here on this right there, but it should be kind of diminished all the way through. So you should have a gradation of dark values within that shadow. So this is what I did with all that. Came in, and so there's the heron. I changed the colors in that so it's more like a blue heron. And then I had a gradation of values from really dark, oops, right here, especially right under where it gets closer to the ground. It's going to be much darker and warmer in color temperature right there. And then it softens out as it moves away, and we get more ambient light that's filtering into that area. Same thing over on this side. And then I broke up this shape right here of that shadow back in behind the bridge, so it's not quite so distractive. Especially, we don't want anything distracting from the heron right here. I also made the heron bigger. So if you look right here, see how it's smaller? I made it bigger right there. Brought in a little bit more stronger light and shadow, stronger contrast in these trees because they're closer to the viewer. I put more atmosphere into the trees back here so they go way away from the viewer, and then increase a little bit more the contrast of light and shadow into some of this area in here, just to give it a little bit more punch there. And then just like this right here, diminish this a little bit so that the baskets are still there, but hopefully they don't distract quite so much from the heron, which seems to be more the center of interest of the painting. So if we go back and forth, really I was softening I'm trying to make it, I brought in a little bit more light at the front of the bridge so that it kind of pulls the viewer into the bridge. We go across the bridge and then softening it and going more to the bright over here so that then it's also pulling the viewer this direction so that we're moving then through the painting like that. And so those are just small things, but they can really make a big difference on helping to guide the viewer through the painting. And I diminished the shadow that, or the reflection of the heron that you had down here because it seemed to distract as well from the overall painting. And I tried to get variety and by using the colors that you already had there, some variety in these trees so they're not all the same. Areas where, oops, don't want that, go back here to that, yes. Areas where it's brighter, and then we have shadow areas where the trees are going back in and being blocked from the light, that sort of thing. So just to maintain a variety through the painting. And that really is it. That's the overall changes in there. Let's see. So I did try to work with kind of the feeling of shadow that you have in here by bringing some light around the base of the trees here while maintaining that it's darker behind it, kind of like right here, you have the little shadow back behind there. So just giving more of that feeling of light on one area and shadow on the other. You might want to think about that when it comes to like this tree back here, Tom, where it seems like it's almost darker on this side and lighter on this side, but it seems like your shadow is going that direction, which makes me think that the light would be more on this side of the trees and more shadow on this side of the trees. So those are things to think about. Always maintain that feeling of where the light source is coming from, especially when we have definite lights and shadows in a painting. Otherwise, I think really overall, it's just taking what you did already and heightening it up in certain areas, making stronger shadows in some areas, lightening up and adding more atmosphere into other areas, while overall not really changing the painting dramatically from what you already have here. So it's really well done, beautiful piece, and just a fun. I love this shape. It really, so oftentimes when we get a shape like this, it's hard to do a shape like that and not have it just be a big, boring area of color. But you've done a fantastic job with it, Tom. The shadows down here in the bottom, where we go from shadow to these strong colors here that are not just a big, it's not like you have just one big shape here and then a light shape and then dark shape and a light shape. You've got all kinds of paint texture and color and so much variety that it really just is interesting to look at. And so you've taken a big kind of unwieldy shape right there, and you've managed it. You've done a great job with it, so that it just leads us to the rest of the painting that has more activity going on in it. So that works out fantastic, Tom. I think you did a great job with that. All right, so thank you. Again, fantastic piece, Tom. Okay, and this is our last one. This is Weston. Weston, I love pictures or paintings of the Grand Canyon. If that's something that you like to do a lot, is the Grand Canyon, I would look up Kurt Walters, C-U-R-T, and then Walters, W-A-L-T-E-R-S. He is one of the best painters of the Grand Canyon in the world, if not the best. They're just amazing. And you have to see the originals. You don't get nearly the effect from the images on the computer or in a magazine that you get with the originals. His originals I've seen his work ever since the early 90s. He was in Santa Fe even back then, and his work has come a long way since then. But he has lots of little brush strokes, and he gets all these every one of them is different from another. And there's just so much involved in those paintings. They're really, really well done. So Kurt Walters is a great resource for Grand Canyon paintings. Okay, so I like, especially Weston, my favorite part, I think, is the sky up here. And the way it comes down and meets this area here. I love this, all of what you have going on with the rock formations down below. I think that just is fantastic. And I think this is a lot of fun too. This tree that comes out right here, it's a really fun shape that you've done with it right there. And I like that a lot. I think that it's just so much fun to look at. And the way that you've done the texture from light to dark in here is excellent. And I love this, that you took this branch right here and you have it in shadow, fully in shadow, so that it goes back and you're creating that sense of depth right there. So that's kudos to that. Very well done. I like this green bush right here. I love the color in it. So the things that stood out to me. This right here is one little big yellow shape, and it's diagonal, which diagonal is action, which triangular shapes like that overall demand a lot of attention. And there's really not much going on with this whole big shape right there, Weston. You have so much happening back here, and it's so thought out and beautifully done. We can fill the old rock precipices and things, the weathering, and just the nature of that Grand Canyon element that's back there. But when we get up into like these right here, you have these beautiful soft edges in these rocks back here. When you do like that dark right there and the lights right there on the edges, they're just so nicely done. The transitions from one thing to another just feel very natural. But when we get up here to this rock right here, they're very strong, hard edges almost all the way through it, especially on the outside right here. Very strong, hard edges. And I realize my brush is very big. And then the same thing, kind of what we have going on with this one right here. It's just a very hard edge and a really strong yellow shape. So I thought, well, what can we do with that? Because what it's doing right now, Weston, is it's kind of forming almost a wall that blocks us off, and it doesn't offer much to the viewer like the rest of the painting does. And yet it's very prominent. It's very strong in color compared to the rest of the painting, very bright in value. So it's saying, look at me. But in saying look at me, it's saying look at me even though I don't have much to offer you, not compared to what you have in the rest of the painting. So then I thought, well, okay, so what can we do about that? What can we offer to the viewer? So I did change it quite a bit, Weston, and it might not be something that you want to do, but it's just a possibility of what you might do with it in case you just don't have any ideas about it at all. So this is what I did. First of all, I did soften out. I changed, bringing in a lot the way you did back here. I brought in different values and colors in there than just what you had there. I also, see, like right here, Weston, right in that spot, I have a hard time knowing if the rock is coming over the bush or the bush is coming over the rock. And that's because of the brightness of these little areas right here on that rock and the breakup of that bush right there. So I changed the bush a little bit so that we have definite separation between the rock going back behind it and the bush coming towards the viewer. So this is what I did, Weston, right here. Brought in, and the colors, I really should have brought in, I put a little bit of the yellow that you have back in here in this rock into this right here, but I didn't put enough. I really need a lot more of that yellow into these rocks right here. So I didn't think of that until I came back and saw it again and realized, wow, this is really different in color from this right here. So disregard the coloration in the rocks, But hopefully you can take that and see kind of a possibility of what you might do. So like bringing in, there's a lot of little plants at the Grand Canyon, just like the bush that you have back here. There are all kinds of plants at the Grand Canyon. You could bring in some of the green color that's in this, into these bushes in here, this little plant down here, maybe down there. That's actually kind of a dark spot that you probably change that up quite a bit. But really it's just like this, coming in with some definite rock shapes, some areas that are not so much, but it's really leading the viewer down as if they could move down that direction into the painting. And that's really all that it was about. But how can we make this interesting? Because it's right here near the viewer. We don't necessarily want to take away from everything that's in the background, but we want to have something here that's worth looking at. And then we take that and we think, okay, so now how can we move from the stuff that's interesting right here to the stuff that's also interesting off in the distance? And so that's what I was trying to do with that part. And so there's a lot of things you could probably do better than what I've done with it right here, especially when it comes to the coloration that I used in this area right here. But that was just to give you kind of an idea of what was possible with it. With the bush right here, I tried to make it so that it feels very, very definitely that the bush is coming forward and the rock is back behind it. And then softening out, you could probably still do some work, Weston, with the edges on here. They're still very hard edged along there. Part of that is because, and my words are starting to go just at the end, better than in the middle. See the dark right there? Let me actually zoom in on that. So if we zoom in right here on this, there we go. So you got that dark edge right there, and see that dark edge right there? And then we have the really bright edge highlight on the rocks. It's that combination of the highlight and the dark behind it, and that dark behind it is darker than the rest of the rock. See, like right here, see that? The value of that? This little strip right there is darker than the value of the rock overall back here. So you could take this value right here and soften the darkness of that right there all the way across so that it doesn't feel like a dark outline on those rocks, and that will help to soften out the hard edge of that, the hard edge quality of it. And then if you take the light, and you've done some great work with softening edges, like on these, you've got wonderful soft edges and a lot of this down in here. Even on your tree, you have hard edges and then you have more lost edges. If you can take that same principle and apply the lost and found edges on your rocks, like you did with the rest of your painting, that is going to nail it. It will feel much more natural. You definitely want stronger color and stronger contrast in here than what you have back here, like the brighter highlights, but you just don't want them to be quite so hard edged. And that will help it to feel much more natural, and it will help the viewer to actually move past that and go into the background much more readily. So otherwise, the sky, fantastic sky. It really has that feeling of drama, and it moves us down into where we meet up with the canyon areas. Beautiful coloration in your bushes and in your trees. So much that it's just wonderful working in here, Weston. This is going to take some work on your part, but everything that you've done in here shows me that you're fully capable of doing this sort of thing. Of course, from your perspective, doing what you think would work well in there, but just giving it a lot more, breaking up that diagonal shape, that triangle shape right there, and making it more interesting, while also allowing the viewer to move back into the painting. So, okay, that is it. Excellent job, beautiful work, Weston. One thing to pay attention to, Weston, real quick, is this right here. There's a white highlight on the edge of that at the bottom, and a really dark shadow spot on that. that contrast right there is a natural feeling compared to the rest of the tree. The rest of the tree is fantastic. I mean, it just feels really nice. All of this in here, beautiful, beautifully done, Weston. So, okay, that's it. So now I'll get back over here, and actually I'll leave up the painting until Christy tells me if we're done with the paintings, if we want to move on to something else.
Yeah, there's no questions specifically to any of the paintings.
Okay. So I'll just.
Not painting right now. And actually, we just have one question, which I'm kind of eager to hear your answer to this one.
Great.
No, because you've done it.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a challenge. It's like I'm going to see if you can solve this one.
This is from Kathy Reynolds. She's asking, I'm just transitioning to oil from watercolor. Any advice? Love this trend.
Oh yeah, we've been talking about that quite a bit here lately, Kathy. So the wonderful thing about watercolor, where watercolor and oil painting are a lot alike, is that watercolor is much like what we do when we're putting in the initial washes for oil painting. And there are some people, like if you look at a Richard Schmid, watch his process. He does on many of his paintings, he'll do like his initial washes are just a lot of mineral spirits and a little bit of color, and they're just washed in like water. And they're very fluid, and especially with some of his flowers. And he'll then go in and you know what? I'm going to find the painting real quick, because this will illustrate what I'm talking about much better than what I can do on my own. So I keep files of paintings by, oh man, I have probably, let's see, how many does it say here? I probably have 300 artists that I have folders for. I've been doing this ever since I was in art school or before. I would get all the art magazines, and sometimes I would cut out paintings by certain artists, and I would keep them in manila folders. Well, I'm doing the same thing on the computer today. When I see a painting that I really like, I go, I'm going to keep that one, and I copy that image and I put it into a folder. Now, I don't necessarily go back and look at them very often, but when I really want some inspiration or something like that, I will go back through and look at those folders. So I have a folder with Richard Schmid's work in here. And I'm going to bring up one of his flowers real quick. I also have about every book that he's ever made. I've loved Richard Schmid's work for a long time, since the early 90s. Actually, since the late 80s, when I was in art school. He had on the cover of actually, I don't remember what magazine it was. One of the magazines, Art of the West, it might have been Art of the West. He had an image of his wife, Nancy, on there in a white dress. And she was holding flowers. It was just such a beautiful piece. And that was when I first fell in love with Richard Schmid's work. And then I actually went to and I'm looking here for one of the images that I'm talking about. I went to the Arts for the Parks show, because I lived up in Montana at the time. And I went to the Arts for the Parks show, and he had won first place with that. $100,000 prize at that time. Here we go, here's a good one. And it's a small image though. $100,000 prize is what he got for a waterfall. And that's when I really fell in love with his work. Just seeing all the color he had in there, how natural it looked, how real, and yet he had so much color and contrast. And I just thought, wow, this is really good. So I've liked his work for a long time. Okay, so now I'm going to share this screen here. So we're gonna So we're going to stop sharing that one, and I'm going to share a different screen. Go. Right there. Screen, and voila. Okay, so here's one. So this is what I'm talking about. Right here, and I cannot mark on it, I'm afraid, but this stuff right here, where you see that in the background, that's just thin washes of color. These down here in the bottom right corner, those greens and things like that, those are really thin washes. If you go to the left corner over here, see that little edge right there? I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a little edge of color. That's where those washes kind of, it's like what happens in watercolor when you do the real washy stuff. That's what he's done there. And then he starts to build on that with thicker and thicker oil paint, but he leaves a lot of that initial wash in the background. That's a great transition between watercolor and oil paint. Do you see these up here in the upper right corner? The leaf kind of stuff up in there. Those are just really thin mineral spirit washes. Not any different than what you would do often with watercolor. And when I was in school, when I was in art school, I did a lot of watercolor. I had 5 watercolor classes going from beginning up to advanced watercolor. And I was doing a lot, lots and lots of watercolors. And I sold, that was some of the early work that I was selling too in galleries, was watercolors. So I loved watercolor. And I've utilized some of that over the years with my oil painting, just the techniques that I use in there. Because even when I did watercolor, I still used often, so I have these really expensive, like one of the watercolor brushes I had was $300. And many of them were like $100 to $150 a piece. Because they were those really soft sables, rounds that hold their shape incredibly well. And I still have all those brushes. But I didn't use those brushes nearly as much as I used my oil painting bristle brushes. So I would get bristle brushes, and I used those because of the texture I could get in the watercolors. And that was kind of like a transition for me into the oil painting, was just the textures that I would get using those particular brushes. And I used bristle brushes, of course, the hog bristle brushes is what I'm talking about. I use those with both watercolor and with oil paint. So there's a lot of techniques, and just like this, what we're talking about with this Richard Schmid painting, a lot of techniques that can transition from one to the other. So if you just think about the things that you've done in watercolor that you really liked, what was it about watercolor that made you want to do watercolor for so long? If there's something in there where you just think, man, I really like this technique, I hate to get rid of that. Well, you might not have to get rid of that. You might be able to transition that into your oil paintings. So all that Richard Schmid has done here is where you see the actual flowers and the center area there, he's just using more opaque paint there than he did in the outer areas. The outer areas are more like a watercolor, and the inner area is more like an oil painting. And so he's utilizing the two together that way. The other thing is you can actually use watercolor as an underpainting. You don't have to, so the way this works is watercolor, you can paint oil paint on top of almost anything. So you can actually paint on top of watercolors. You could, in effect, take your old watercolors that you have. Now you would want to, so the one caveat here is with watercolors, if you painted on watercolor paper, you could still oil paint on top of those. But you would first want to seal it with something like an acrylic medium, just a clear acrylic, not a varnish, because you don't want to paint on top of varnish. Varnish is removable. And so if they ever, like in 100 years, go back and somebody wants to clean your painting, they're going to want to remove the varnish. So you don't want to have paint layers that you want to keep on top of a varnish. But you could take something like an acrylic medium and cover the watercolor. It will protect the paper from the oil paints, and you could paint right on top of old watercolors. But on top of that, you could take whatever you're working on now, and you could use watercolors as your initial washes. So for me, I stay away from mineral spirits for the most part, especially here in my studio. So because I don't want to have any fumes, any toxic fumes of any kind in my studio. I used mineral spirits for 20 years in my, maybe more in my career, but now I try to stay away from most of all those solvents. So for me now, I can take watercolor, use those as my initial washes, and it's actually healthier to paint on top of watercolor than it is to paint on top of acrylic for oils, because of the nature of acrylic compared to oil. You can paint oil on top of acrylic, but they're very different in nature as far as the future for conservation purposes. So you're actually better off using watercolor as an initial wash. One, because it dries almost immediately. Acrylic does not. Acrylic dries fast, and we think it's kind of deceptive because it dries so that we can't do anything to it. It dries so quickly that way, like within 20, 30 minutes, that we think we should be able to just paint on it right away. But it actually takes a couple of days for it to dry to the point that we should paint on top of it. That's the reason why watercolor is superior to acrylic overall when it comes to an underpainting. So watercolor, the water evaporates almost immediately or within minutes. So we could paint on top of watercolor just like that. And we don't have to do anything to it. Now, if we get the watercolor so we have it too thick, like a really opaque watercolor where there's a lot of, and it dries and there's a lot of powder, there might be an adhesion problem because of the powderiness. Like if we try to paint on top of pastel, that's really what we're talking about here. If we're so thick with the watercolor that the water evaporates and there's a lot of dry pigment there, that could cause some problems. That's why we really wouldn't want to oil paint on top of pastel, because it's like painting on top of dirt. It's just a lot of powder right there. And that powder can cause adhesion problems with the oil paint. Other than that, if you took even with pastel, if you take and put some kind of a glaze on top of it so that it really soaks into that pastel, then really all you've got then is a chalky oil paint, and you could then paint on top of that, as long as it's not too powdery and you're not going to be having adhesion problems. But as far as the pigment goes, it's all the same, from watercolor to pastel to acrylic to oil. They're using the same pigments, same coloration, same thing that makes the colors. It's the same in all the things basically, tempera, any of that. So it's really the binder, and in this it's gum arabic, usually with watercolor, and then you've got water is the solvent. So water evaporates and you can paint right on it, and then you can actually varnish it. So it is going to, the varnish with watercolor, it's good to keep in mind that the varnish is going to change the look of the watercolor when you're done. But it will really look more like it did when you first placed it on there and it was very wet. So yes, some people even today will take their watercolors just by themselves and varnish them so that they don't have to put them under glass. A lot of purist watercolorists don't like that because it changes the overall look of the watercolor, but you can still do it. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let's see. So there are a lot of possibilities with it, but that might help you in your transition from watercolor to oil. Just think in terms of oil becoming an enhancement in the beginning for your watercolor paintings. And you can have a lot of fun with it. You can get a lot more saturated color and some really fun effects with oil paint that you couldn't get with watercolor. So you're gonna love that part of it. All right. Any other questions, Christy?
The second question was your answer to the first question. So we are good to go.
That was it?
So great stage, everyone.
So that was all the questions. All right. Well, Great. That was a great question, though. I love that. I'm excited. I haven't had a chance to try out the watercolor underwash, underpainting. I just know it's possible, but I'm excited to do it. I just haven't had the time to do it yet. But when, especially out on location, like it's going to be so much easier to take a little box of watercolors with me and a pad, like a sketch pad, and or even my my regular panels that I paint on, like my ABS plastic panels or something like that. I can paint right on those with watercolor, and then they're going to dry, and I can stack them and transport them so easily compared to trying to transport wet oil paintings. If I'm on a quick trip or something, it's going to be so easy comparatively speaking. So I'm looking forward to that and trying that out when I'm out on some plein air excursions. Yes, Christy.
So RW Browning wants to know which Richard Smith waterfall won that $100,000 prize. Do you happen to have an image of that?
I
And
do.
then Lee Lewis says it works. No water.
All right. Yeah, actually, I can show you that right now. RW, give me a second. Let's see, people, flowers, buildings. I have so many images of Richard Schmid's that I've actually divided them into subfolders within his folder. So I have Richard Schmid buildings, Richard Schmid flowers, Richard Schmid people, and Richard Schmid still life. And then I have just the landscapes that are in the regular folder. So let me find that original waterfall. Is that it? That might be it right there. There it is. I know it by sight, so I didn't even have to look up if this was the right one. Love this painting. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Let me go back to, that's right, I have to go back to the Zoom here so you can see it. Show on stream, and boom. Oh, why is it not showing? Oh, okay, so I have to refresh the sharing. What's it doing? Oh, there it is, wrong one. And that. Now, show. Sorry, my software is giving me some trouble here. I've got to make it bigger so I can get to it. There we go, and hide that one. And where's that one? There it is. That's the one that won the $100,000 prize. Now, the Arts for the Parks, I was in that a couple of times. They transitioned from a $100,000 prize, I think the first year, to then $50,000, and then it went down to I think 25,000 until eventually it just kind of disappeared after a while. But it went on for a long time. I think William Scott Jennings, I think Thomas Kincaid might have won something one year. There was a lot of, but Mayan Satu, I remember seeing him at one of the shows that I was in when I got into the show. I didn't apply that often. I wish I had back then. It was really a great one. In fact, one of my friends, who fantastic painter, Mark Ogle, he made a fantastic living from a long time just because of the success that he had from that show. He didn't win the show, but he got into the top 100 like 4 or 5 years in a row when the show first started. He's an artist that lives in Montana, and he got commissions from being in that show from the collectors that found him from that show, where he was doing like he would do like $5,000-$10,000 paintings a month just from the commissions that he got from that. And he did that all year long. He would have really these are big paintings, you know, like 40 by 50 inch sort of thing. Really nicely done of landscape with like pack horses and stuff. But I don't know. That was with the software. Had nothing to do with, darn. So is it live? What's it doing here? I reloaded it, but it's still not showing anything happening. Can you see? It shows a big blue screen. Let's see. Share. Show on the screen. Live. Is it back yet, Christy, or is it just gone?
It's hard to tell because I'm on a delay,
Yeah, the 30-second delay. Can you let everybody know in the chat that?
It looks like I can see you though. I can see you on the Facebook.
Okay, so because on Facebook, mine is showing. Maybe if I refresh it. Let me see if that.
I mean, I see you there. Right? I can't look at post.
No.
No, you're there. You're there.
I am?
Yeah.
Because mine doesn't show anything happening. Okay, so anyway, as far as those who are just getting started and you're a bit discouraged because it seems like there's such a long way to go. My friend Mark, he started out as a business owner. He owned a Tandy leather business. And then he wanted to be a painter because he lived in Kalispell, Montana, or Whitefish area. And that's where I lived when I was a kid. And my dad was just had a big group of artists there that he was friends with. Great, that's where my framer was, Ed Sanders, who has since passed away. But it was a wonderful art community. Linda Tippett, who's part of the Oil Painters of America, she was part of that group. My dad would have coffee with this group every day when he'd go in for work. He was a graphic designer at the time that was also painting. Anyway, Mark decided that he wanted to be a painter. He just loved art, he loved painting, and he wanted to be a painter. And so he sold his business and he moved, I think he moved back into his parents' home. He was older, but probably like 30 or something. Moved into his parents' basement and he worked 8 hours a day, every day on his painting. And he was terrible when he started. I mean, when I say terrible, like as beginnerish looking as anything you would see. My framer especially they were good friends too. And so he filled in a lot of the gaps there of things that I didn't know. But Mark just worked at it. He worked at it day after day after day. And he got to where, like we just talked about, he made a tremendous living as a painter. I don't know what he's doing right now. I haven't been back there for a long time. But for at least a couple of decades that I know, he made a really, really good living as an artist. We're talking high six-figure income. So if you're looking at how long it might take, yeah, it does take a long time sometimes to really learn what we're doing. But it's the same for all of us. The process is it's an experiential kind of occupation. We have to have the experience. We have to actually do it. We can read books and learn as much as we can, but in the end, we have to apply what we learn and actually do it. And as we do that, and especially as we really, like we saw with some of the paintings earlier, where there's no fear, go forward with no fear and just do it. And you're going to progress much more quickly than you ever thought, than in the beginning it seemed possible. So don't lose heart, don't get discouraged, just keep going after it because it is possible. All right. So
Sharita asked, what was the name of the artist that got commissioned work from the shows?
Mark Ogle, Ogle.
And then Kathy says, thanks, Bill. I worked at the CSFAC when the Arts of the Park started.
Oh, wow. Well, that's really cool. So you probably saw, you know a lot more about it than I do.
So those are all the questions for today.
All right. I just remember the show was in Jackson Hole, and I lived in Western Montana and went to school in Idaho. And so I went to Jackson Hole all the time. And so I loved going to that show. That was one of the highlights of my year. Each year was going to that show. And being involved in the show too was a lot of fun. So anyway, I guess that's it. So thank you everyone. My voice is pretty well gone. And thank you for enduring my long-windedness. I hope that there is some value in the critiques as well for you. So beautiful paintings, everyone. Thank you for sharing. Let's see, coming up, I am working on the lily painting, the video. It's just, it's a long one, so it's going to take me a while to finish it, sorry. And then Christy and I will be in Colorado. We are not supposed to encourage people to really come to the Broadmoor too much, but if you're in that area, I would love to meet up with you, have lunch or whatever. When I say not encourage, it's they don't, like, there's going to be a lot of really top name artists that are going to be there all month, and the Broadmoor Hotel itself doesn't want to be overrun with people who are just coming there to meet the artist. It's really for the hotel guests and for the art collectors is what they're trying to focus it on. So, but I don't want to tell you don't come. It's just realize that they just don't want this big influx of like people that are coming there just to see the artists. They want art collectors, people that are coming by the art, and because they don't want to take away. This is a big deal for the hotel to allow this kind of an event to happen there, because the patrons of the people who are there for the hotel, they pay a lot of money for those rooms. We're talking anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a night for a room, and they do not want anything to take away from that. It's not a place. It's not like an outdoor art event. You know, it's a completely different environment, and they don't want to take away from that. So I'm not trying to say, you know, don't come, but at the same time realize that that's what the Broadmoor Hotel itself wants to maintain, that kind of environment. So they want art collectors and the patrons mostly there. But with that, send me an email or something like that. If you're in the area, Christy and I are both going to be there. We'd love to meet up with you and meet you and say hi and all of that. I'll also be at the Plein Air Convention in August in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's the beginning of August, or the second week, I think. So if you're going to be there, same thing. I think Carol's going to be there, which will be fantastic. I'll get to see her. Let's see, what else? And then we'll let you know the dates of the activities are coming in July. And next Wednesday. So every Wednesday, I'm there for the Lunch with Bill, just to hang out. It's an informal thing. It's not a training thing. We're just there to get to know one another. But I will answer questions. If you have an art question or anything, it's not that I won't train. It's just that it's not a formal training kind of situation. We're there to get to know one another. Yes?
The Plein Air Convention is August 11th, if you're wondering. I put it up on the chat thing.
Okay, great.
It starts on August 11th, I believe, through the 15th. And then Jennifer Darusha asked, what kind of medium did you say between watercolor and oil?
Okay, it's only if you, it's really, when I talked about that, it was some kind of an acrylic gel. It's really just some kind of an acrylic that is still clear, but it will seal off the paper. Really all you're doing is trying to keep, like most of the time people will paint watercolor on paper, right? Well, oil on paper will rot the paper eventually. It can last for a long, long time without any real detrimental effect to it, but eventually the oils in the oil paint are going to deteriorate or affect the natural fibers in the paper. It's not the same thing on wood. Like a wood panel, you can paint straight on a wood panel and not have to worry about it. So, or like with the plastic, the ABS plastic panels, you can paint straight on it with both watercolor and oil, and you don't have to do anything to the watercolor. So if you're painting straight onto canvas, something that's already been sealed off, it's already prepared with a primer or whatever, you can paint straight on there with watercolor and then paint straight on top of the watercolor with oil paint. But if you already have watercolors and they're on paper, you can usually if you want to paint on paper with oil paint, you would take like acrylic gesso and seal the paper with it, or shellac or something like that. But if you're trying to keep your watercolor painting and still be able to see it, then in order to protect the paper itself, you would use like a clear acrylic, like a GAC 100 or something like that. Something clear that isn't going, you can still see your painting, the watercolor painting, but it will allow you to paint on top of the paper without hurting the paper. That's all it is. So hope that helps. I'm not an expert at all the different acrylic mediums that are out there, but I know there are some clear acrylic mediums that you can put on top of the paper that will seal it off, that you can still paint on top of with oil paints. So you'll still be able to see your watercolor and paint on top of that. So, all right. So I think that's it. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. I hope I can see a lot of you on Wednesday. And that's it. So have a wonderful rest of your month. Enjoy the warm temperatures to get out maybe and do some painting outdoors. And I hope I get to see you at some of these events out in Colorado and Santa Fe. Alrighty. Have fun, everyone, and happy painting.